Welcome to the Seeking Justice podcast, a podcast dedicated to exploring and spotlighting issues of justice and injustice throughout the world. I'm your host, Benedict Bloggs, a passionate and dedicated social and environmental justice advocate throughout my entire adult life, and now a barrister at law and international human rights advocate based in Brisbane, Australia. I want to use this platform to give a voice to the voiceless, to interview interesting guests working on important human rights and social justice and environmental issues, and as an independent media mechanism to carry on call forth positive change in our societies and our world. The Seeking Justice podcast crew acknowledge the First Nations peoples of Australia, specifically the Yuggera and Turrbal peoples of Meanjin and Brisbane, the traditional custodians of the lands on which we live and work. We acknowledge that their sovereignty was never ceded. We pay our respects to their ancestors, their descendants, their elders past, present and emerging who continue cultural and spiritual connections to country. We recognise their valuable contributions to Australian and global societies. We acknowledge the stories, traditions and living cultures of our First Nations peoples and their contributions and sacrifices towards a better community and a better future. We also acknowledge the need for all of us to reclaim our own indigeneities from the lands from whence we came. Welcome, everyone, to episode 2 of the Seeking Justice podcast, the podcast dedicated to social justice and interviewing legendary figures from around the world and finding out what motivates them to do their wonderful work. And today I have my incredible dear friend from law school, Eddie Lloyd. I'm not allowed to call her Edwina. Eddie Lloyd, the inimitable Eddie Lloyd and the indefatigable Eddie Lloyd, social justice warrior, drug law reformer, human rights advocate and whistleblower warrior, probably with an A and a O, warrior. But nonetheless doing some amazing work over the past decade or so since we left law school. And I wanted to interview Eddie about her amazing career and what motivates her to do the work that she does, and also to find out about the wonderful work that she is doing. And in post-production, well, I should say this is the first filming of the Seeking Justice podcast, so welcome everyone. There will be a segment maybe called Unsolicited Podcast Advice, where Eddie said she hated microphones being in the picture. We failed on that count, and I wasn't allowed to wear headphones. So here we are. Please leave any more feedback in the comments for any other unsolicited advice you have on how I should do this podcast, and I will probably exercise my right to ignore it, but it will still be good to have it nonetheless. So without further ado, welcome, Eddie.
Thanks, Benna, for having me here.
And where are we? We're in beautiful Byron Bay.
We are in Arapul National Park in Bundalang country. And it's beautiful here today. We've got an overcast day. It's been raining a little bit, so it's wet all the tourists out of town. So that's great. Things have freed up a bit for us.
Love that. And I should acknowledge the traditional owners of the land, elders past, present and emerging, and acknowledge them and the fact that sovereignty was never ceded in this country in which we exist, and the obvious ongoing adverse legacies of colonialism is also something that this podcast will hope to investigate and talk about.
Yeah.
Genocide, indeed, and the repercussions that are still obviously very loudly encompassing the globe today. So, Eddie, I think it's amazing. I'm going to, in post-production, I'll put up this funny photo of me and Eddie. We both won the top award. 2009, we won the top award for philosophy of law. And what was the silly T-shirts we got?
Yeah. If you can't.
Something about practice and.
It was inverted.
Yeah.
It's good in theory.
Yeah, if it's good in theory, it's good in practice.
But nerds.
Yeah.
Very competitive nerds, and the T-shirt just did not know who to award it to, so she gave it to both of us.
Yeah. And given it was probably at Byron Bay Summer School, we probably should have had a meditation off or something like that. Some kind
philosophy of law.
Yeah, some kind of non-violent combat we should have engaged in to actually take out the prize. But in any event, ever since then, we didn't really like each other when we first met because it was, I think it...
Like, name. And he always answering all the questions online like smart about Benedict Bloggs. And I met him in real life at the Advanced Advocacy Summer School Workshop in Byron Bay here, and we just gave a high five, and we've been besties since.
Indeed.
The illusion that we thought about each other online, and we were like different in real life. It happens. So sometimes those people on the internet that you don't like might become your bestie. You just never know.
They might be another Benedict. You never know. I mean, or an Eddie, or an Edwina Michaela. They could be an Eddie. Look, in my defence, my mother named me Benedict. I suffered my whole childhood. There was no Benedict Cumberbatch around to save me into coolness. So I abandoned the name until I started writing letters to the editor, and they must have thought I was a crouchy old man.
Yeah.
And I was a young whippersnapper concerned about the native forests in West Australia. And I would always, without exception, get my letters published when I put Benedict Coin. So ever since then, it makes me sound like a stuffy, arrogant barrister probably. So it's quite fitting for me. So what I wanted to ask you about is what inspired you to study law?
Never been asked that question. I think it was all my life. I had this, look, I really loved hobos, homeless people when I was younger. And I used to always make my mum go and buy some milk and give them the milk. They lived under the bridge where I was growing up. And I just had this, I don't know, sense of injustice always in me. My mum was a single mum, a widower from, my dad was in World War II. And so we grew up pretty, we didn't have a lot of money, and I could see that things weren't fair and there were different classes of people. And I think that just stayed with me throughout my life. I've always been a bit of a fighter. And so it really was a natural progression for me to enter the law and start defending people who have been let down by, decades of poor social welfare policy, people living in disadvantage, just to help them. Really, social justice work really is what I think a lot of criminal defence lawyers do. And I've really enjoyed it. It's been a very interesting career, and I've met amazing people and seen people change from having the worst possible behaviours you can imagine to being leaders in their community. Kinds of great stories of humanity and resilience. It's a real honour to represent people. A lot of the time I'm just a social worker, though.
Yep.
That's a lot of defence lawyers find themselves being social workers, so you really need to have that skill of really being relatable to people no matter where you come from. You've got to be able to understand where they're coming from, because otherwise you're just not going to be able to connect with them, and they're not going to listen to you, because a lot of the time you have to be trying to guide them on a better path. There's the criminal side of things, but then they present with all of these social issues as well. They might have substance use disorder, they might be homeless, they might have mental health conditions, undiagnosed, unmedicated. So it really is a lawyer's job, a modern lawyer's job, is to open those doors and help them connect with those agencies to start dealing with all of those aspects of their life which have really led them down this path towards them, behaving in a way that has got them in trouble with the law. So it's really those social issues that a lot of lawyers have to look at when they're representing their client. I mean, the law is obviously important, and we try to get justice in the courts, but it's an opportunity. So what I always say to my clients, it's an opportunity. You're at this crossroads now to make a change. Many people have before. And you can be that person, My mum used to say, tomorrow is the first day of the rest of your life. To share that with my clients.
Yes.
It's okay. You can start again tomorrow, and you can forgive yourself.
Yep.
And start again,
Yes.
Keep waking up and forgiving yourself and moving on, and not getting stuck in a rut that it's too late, too old. Because I thought I was too old when I entered the law.
Yes.
In my 30s. So I studied law after I got in trouble with the law. And that's the real story he was digging for at me.
And, well, actually, just on that note, and I mean, to me, I don't practice in criminal law, and I mainly do civil law, discrimination law, employment law, admin law, etc. But I completely relate to the notion of being there for your clients and having traumatized people engaging with the legal system, perhaps for the first time, perhaps for the 50th time. Yeah. But in any event, there's an opportunity there to be supportive, and also certainly in civil litigation, even if you're successful after a long battle in litigation, which is can be very taxing, it doesn't necessarily solve all your problems. It's like winning the lottery. People get hit with sudden wealth syndrome and all those other things. So there is an opportunity to reflect, or for people to reflect, and to, especially in employment relationships when they break down, and people moving on with their lives or deciding what they want, as well as maybe a principled stance to try and get justice for what they have been through, for sure.
Take responsibility.
That's right.
A lot of the time, not a lot of the time, but sometimes people present, and there's evidence there that's very clear that it was that person doing that particular thing, and they don't want to take responsibility. So it's a bit of a journey that clients go on with the lawyer, where you walk them down, sometimes down the plank, unfortunately, but walk them down the plank of rehabilitation, where you can show them that taking responsibility is a positive thing. It's going to be better, not just for their court outcome, but it's going to be better for them. It's the beginning of the rehabilitation step.
Yep.
Is taking responsibility, having some insight, and then hopefully sharing that with other people as well. I think that's what you'll find. A lot of people who are in social work and carers and things like that have had a bit of lived experience already, and they share what they know with these people. So I often see clients going in and doing Cert 4 and, community services like that, because I think they're the ones that are placed best to help people who are at that crossroads needing all of that kind of social assistance. So, yeah, it's about giving them hope as well. So, a lot of the time when they're in the cells and they're a mess, and they might be coming down from ICE and they're in their jail again, they've done the same thing again, and are they going to get bail? And angry a lot of the time, sometimes it's an opportunity for me to share my story and to tell them I've been on that side of the cell as well, and look at me now. Okay, you might not want to be a lawyer, but you can turn your life around, change it, and be whatever you want to be. And often a question that I ask them is, what did you want to be when you were growing up? When you were 5 or 6, okay? Fireman, doctor, lawyer, whatever.
Astronaut.
I get them to think about that.
Taylor Swift.
No one has said that to me yet.
Eddie's a huge fan of Taylor Swift.
Nothing against her. It's just not my...
We've got a segment later called Haters Gonna Hate, 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 Hate.
Remember about what their little dreams they had. Because I think that dreams never die, and I think that you can always, I just started learning guitar at 50 a year ago. Like, it's never too late to do anything.
Yep.
Really. And I tell my clients that, like, it's never too late to turn around. I've seen people turn their lives around at 60, and it's what a gift to themselves and to the world and their community to do that.
Absolutely.
On their light and show other people that it's possible. So not to give up on their dreams is I guess what I'm saying, that you can still achieve whatever you wanted to achieve when you were little.
Absolutely.
Unless you want to be a police officer, of course, which I haven't met anyone actually that's wanting to be a police officer.
Funnily enough. Look, I did a diploma in holistic counselling before I became a lawyer. Well, before I became a lawyer. And funnily enough, like back then, and that was because I grew up in a family who owned a psychiatric hospital. It was always there. I was interested in psychology, but I was also interested in the law. I didn't know which way I wanted to go. And again, I was older. I'd done a lot of travelling. I'd studied a history degree, environmental ethics and eco-psychology and whatnot. And but funnily enough, back then, I wasn't smart enough when I came out and I was trying to get clerkships at top-tier firms, because that's what you were meant to do. I still had holistic counselling on my CV. And that was like a faux pas, because everyone was like, what's holistic counselling? Funnily enough, now, fast forward 15 years, and all of the firms have holistic. We're also holistic. So holistic is the buzzword, but it is important to have that worldly or having that worldly experience as an asset in terms of relating to people. And also, I guess, more so in criminal justice. We were having a fascinating discussion yesterday about the Alexander McConaughey Centre, which is where David McBride is being held, but also about Alexander McConaughey and all of those years ago, the rehabilitative potential and possibilities and realities that can actually manifest if you actually want to rehabilitate people. I mean, it's incredible, and perhaps we can get to that later. Of course, you are representing David McBride, and I was meant to say whistleblower warrior. I think I did say that at the start. Eddie's got a top secret safe in her house that was dropped off by spooks from Canberra, was it? And, well, I'm not allowed to look in it.
No, you're not.
It's got, but it's very John Grisham. So a bit of John Grisham in Byron Bay is a bit exciting, and also a printer that you have to print off or something.
Yeah, and a laptop, but
all a bit.
It's a bit spooky.
It's all a bit deep state.
Deep state.
Deep throat.
A lot of
deep everything.
There's a lot of like security protocols. Like I had to get vetted by the government to check that I was able to have access to read and see.
Yes.
All of this classified kind of material. There's a lot of protocols in place to protect this information getting out, and what David McBride's case really was about, because he did give some journalists some information that was deemed classified and top secret, that he felt it wasn't actually classified and top secret. It was in the public interest that Australians know what is going on with the Australian Defence Force overseas in Afghanistan and different countries like that. So he maintains that, the material is not classified or top secret, but perhaps just embarrassing to the government.
Yes.
There are certainly parts of the classified brief that I wonder how that can be, classified.
Like the restaurant menus at the various outposts and that kind of stuff.
The toilet in Town.
Yeah. And which soldier likes what type of bread?
Yeah. Do they like gluten-free Vegemite?
Oh, yeah. Do they take almond milk, oat milk?
Yeah. Or rice?
Cow milk. Rice milk, even.
Are they vegan?
Yeah. Maybe they take their coffee, just black coffee.
Yeah. Maybe they don't.
It's important. But that
stuff really goes to the heart of national security.
It could be. It could do. I think
That's
so.
what we need to protect. We really need to make sure that those kind of dietary requirements of our soldiers do not get out to the community, because I can just imagine riots and.
Oh yeah. You could have a massive targeted gastro infection that just goes through. with some like
numerous different
with some sullied almond milk, that comes in from California. We do know what that can do. So before we get to talking about David and the case, I also just wanted to jump back a little bit about your inspiration from childhood, etc. But do you remember when the moment was? Because I certainly didn't think I want to be a lawyer. In fact, when I was a outlaw protester before I became a lawyer, I've got this hilarious entry in a diary where I had to go to the magistrate's court in Perth because I'd been charged with something for protesting, and I had written in there, "Oh, it was awful going to court. There was a million people, blah, blah, blah. Why the hell would you ever want to be a lawyer?" is what I wrote about that. So I certainly had no aspirations, although the name of this podcast comes from my high school, John 23rd College in Perth, which was Seek Justice, and the social justice element of Catholicism, which was in Pope John the 23rd. So I guess there was something there, but I'd never kind of connected that I wanted to be a lawyer, no lawyers in my family, etc. So do you remember the time, and do you want to go in a little bit about your journey to then coming to study law, etc.?
Well, it was kind of by accident, really, because from breaking the law, that's one way you can get into law if anyone's wanting to be a fairly good experience of what it's like to be a criminal
on the front line.
It's at the crime, and then it was like, because I had some substance use issues with alcohol, and I went into the Buttery rehab, which is just down the road here.
And we've been playing Paul
months and months and months and months. It was I loved it actually.
We've been playing Paul Kelly on our guitars to her door, which mentions the Buttery.
And because I feel like I woke up in there. I'd been asleep for decades, and I woke up in there, and I just remember wanting to really help people. Like so many people in the Buttery felt that, and so many of them now I see merit workers for the merit program in the court, social workers. I run into them all the time because you have this burning desire to give back when you find recovery from that and you want to share it with everyone. So that's how I kind of felt it in. And I also wanted to I wanted to show my mum that I was smart, because I never felt smart, and I thought my mum was always really disappointed in me, because I was a bit of a disappointment for a long time. And so I kind of enrolled wanting to prove to myself that I could do something like a law degree, because I didn't have good enough grades to do it, unlike Benedict here.
Can I just interject for our friends and followers and justice seekers overseas? What is the Buttery?
Oh, the Buttery is a residential rehabilitation centre where you stay there for 6-9 months to, deal with your substance use issues and all the social issues, actually, and all of the underlying issues.
And can that be ordered by the court that you attend that, or was it not?
I volunteered because I just wanted to get that out of Sydney and away from everyone I knew, and I just wanted to hide away.
Can you talk about what the charges were for you that you had to deal with?
Supply drug.
Okay.
Yeah. And but anyway, I woke up in that place and realised, what have I been doing? And just wanting to make the most of every single day and to try law. And I went and did law. And, for all those people out there, really, people think that law is just for smart people, but it's what's actually being smart, what I learned doing my law degree, because I'm not naturally smart. I'm a rote learner. I've got to read everything 50 times. Once I get it, flip it inside out. But
like the McBride case here, if you can decipher this, you'll know the answers, everything to everything. So that's why we've put it as the backdrop, because that is the mud map to the answer to everything.
And that is actually Justice Kirby said to me once, 99%.
Sorry, you name dropping that?
No, I don't. I'm not even going to say it. We can do that in the later.
Who's Justice Kirby?
He was he was the great dissenter.
Yes, indeed.
Anyway, he signed a book once, one of my law books. He said 99% preparation, 1% perspiration, I think. And that's what I found about law, is that being smart is actually just working hard. It's actually, not everyone is naturally gifted, but I found I could just get just as good just working hard, reading, doing the readings, doing everything. That's what I learned. I mean, it's pretty obvious to most people. For me, I just thought law was going to be impossible, but the more I, buckled down and studied, the more I learned, hey, it works. You just learn and you can do okay.
Yeah.
Well, so that's what I learned about the law. Being smart is doing the work, and anyone could.
And there was no chat GPT back then, so, we couldn't do that.
Benedict on the
But in
chat.
yeah, in my defence, I did work hard at law school, and it was actually a channel for some severe trauma from losing my first child. So I literally, that's how I dealt with my grief, was just went into obsessively into my law studies, and I loved it, much to my surprise. And I've not fallen out of love with the law, although the work is difficult and can be challenging, like any job, etc. But it's a wonderful career, including because of the people you meet, like you said. Yeah, that's amazing. So then we go through your you go through your degree, and then you had a really interesting beginning to your career where you ended up practicing down in Sydney. And one of the cases you did was fascinating with the
first case. My first ever case was a young Indonesian boy who was charged with people smuggling an island, Pantar Island.
Was that your first case?
First ever case.
Wow. Okay.
Paul Blair, who just became magistrate the other day.
Shout outs,
to
Your Honour.
Always no longer to Your Honour, Magistrate Blair.
Magistrate Blair.
He said, "Hey Ed, do you want your first case?" I'm like, "It's just people smuggling," and I was just imagining Russian people in a or something. I don't know. I was like, yeah, and it just blew up, because at the time that was the beginning of when the Scott Morrison's government, thanks to Angus Campbell, who's somewhere in this board here, who created Operation Sovereign Borders with ScoMo, they started stopping all of the ships to stop the smugglers coming to Australia, and there was all that real hate campaign demonising people smugglers. Remember that these people are bad.
Absolutely. And it was also, this was perhaps Scott Morrison, a kind of a bit of a trademark in terms of his political career, but it was about censoring and silencing anything. So it all became on water matters. There was press conferences where he would say nothing. It was all on water matters. It was about restraining information.
Yeah.
And that actually, because I ran the Baby Firuz case in the High Court when I was fairly junior, and that was a Rohingya family who was stateless, who had fled Myanmar, the genocide there. And then the mother they'd been imprisoned on Nauru in effectively a concentration camp. She was pregnant. She was flown into Brisbane to the Mater Hospital to give birth. And then as soon as she'd given birth, they removed her, or they wanted to remove her back to Nauru. And there was a strange section of the Migration Act back then. I mean, that legislation has been amended so many times, but we ran a test case on it. And we didn't have much legal success, as in the Federal Circuit Court and then the High Court, but it did move the minister to allow that family to stay. But it was all around that time when...
The Labor government as well, that ended up giving a directive to the AFP to say you don't have to stop the boats, you can just quietly turn them around, because what ended up happening was there were the people smugglers were actually, a lot of the time, children, young Indonesian children, or impoverished fisher people from Indonesia who were lured onto these boats with the promise that they'd get paid.
And they didn't even know what they were doing, did they?
Didn't even know. They had, my first client who was, when he got to Darwin, he had no idea he was going to be in a different country at all. They go to Christmas Island, which is actually closer to Indonesia, and Indonesia is surrounded by about 16,000 islands. And so Christmas Island used to belong to Indonesia. I can't remember what year, but at some stage it became Australia's territory. It's 1,600 kilometres away from Australia, it's really close to Indonesia. They had no idea, but because it was an Australian territory, obviously Australian laws applied. And my client got off the boat, and the AFP said to him, "How old are you?" They knew some Indonesian, and he said, lima belas, which meant 15. And so they're like, yeah, whatever, we'll take you to the hospital in Darwin and we'll decide how old you are. And how we're going to decide how old you are, we're going to give you a wrist X-ray. Now, this was something, a wrist X-ray to determine age was something that was developed in the 1950s.
Wow.
And so it was all done by comparing to this book. I've got the book, and it's got like 18 X-rays in it, each X-rays of someone from 1, 2 years old, 3 years old, a 4-year-old X-ray, a 4-year-old from here to about here, and covering the wrist. And so what they would do is they'd take an X-ray of the person, like my client, and then they'd go through the book and they'd find the one that close. I know it's so, and this is like
so what my 5-year-old daughter does at daycare.
I compare the pair kind of thing. That looks like that. And what they didn't realise is that young, impoverished children who have been working since they were like 10 or 11, their bones are fused, and so they've got mature wrists. So their wrists actually resemble an 18 or 19-year-old. So that resulted in about 100 children being in our maximum security jails, one of them being my client. And that was the test case. I ran the first X-ray hearing in the Bankstown local court that had been run to discredit the X-ray, and they've removed it now.
Amazing. And
it's doing that process.
But, and what was the strategy to challenge that? What did you do?
Because he was like that, because of his age, they were my instructions that he was 15, and that I had expert reports that had. And also the other thing with these X-rays in the book, they were taken from middle-class white people in America, really well-nourished and, like Indonesian clients. But I had to go over to Indonesia, travel over to get evidence of his age, because they don't believe what comes out of your mouth. All the meanwhile, he's just sitting there in Silverwater maximum security jail working in the laundry.
Adult prisons. And the laundry is notorious, isn't it?
Yeah.
For abuse.
Yes.
And so children working in the laundry.
Psych report done of him. He's intellectually disabled as well. And so anyway, went over to his island with the translator, Pantara Island. Took 3 days to get there.
How did you get there?
Oh my goodness! Well, we flew into Bali, and then
Denpasar Airport.
Yep. And then we got a plane to, I don't know if it was Makassar. I can't remember now. And then this, like a boat, a bus, and then a tiny little boat, like one of their fisher boats that they, do their fishing in, over to this island. I don't think they'd seen white people for a very, very, very long time. I got there and the whole village came out to the shore. It was incredible. It was like a party, and everywhere I went, they were just...
You had fans.
And following, and everyone looking and staring and giggling, and it was very hot. I remember having to go to this, shack. It's just made out of flimsy material, and sitting there and finding, because he was an orphan, his auntie and uncle to get them to sign, to do the affidavit to say that yes, he is that age, and to bring it back and then give it to the Commonwealth DPP to say, knock it off, all the prosecution. This is cruel. By that stage, we started a very big media campaign. So a few lawyers and I were doing lots of media about it, project and radio and whatever about this, the 100 children.
Were the other 100 children also represented by other lawyers, or were they?
Yeah. So a few of us had quite a few of them.
And so who funded you to go to...
Legal Aid.
Did they? Okay.
Yeah, and I went 2 more times after that for my other fisher clients who were older people who were above 18. And I went over there to show gather evidence that they lived a very rudimentary life. They don't read the Sydney Morning Herald and drink, cafe latte in the morning and have full knowledge that Christmas Island is part of Australia. And I had Philip Bolton in that case that changed the law, actually. The first trial I ever did was a people smuggling line briefing Philip Bolton SC. That was an incredible experience.
Amazing.
We changed the law because it was all around knowledge. Did they know Christmas Island, that was an element? We said that was an element that the Commonwealth had to prove. Did they know that they were
trafficking someone
when they got to Christmas Island? They had to know that. And, of course, they didn't. So the evidence that I would go over there and gather for other clients as well, for other lawyers, and give evidence in trials was to show they don't even, they finished school in grade 3, They can't even read. This island is so close to their home. They've even known that it was Australian territory. They just... So then we started seeing prosecutions being pulled everywhere. It was really great. And there was such a great media campaign. That politically the Labor government were in when Nicola Roxon was the Attorney General, and she issued that directive to the AFP just to quietly, you don't have to keep arresting everyone.
And so those 100 children were then deported back to Indonesia.
And then there's been a big class action for them, and they've just won, I think.
Okay.
Yeah, so for
compensation, false imprisonment.
Yes, that's correct.
Okay,
That
interesting.
Last year, a long time after, but I understand that was successful and compensation is going to be paid.
And I also recall your first client. Wasn't there an issue as well, being from where he was, that people just don't have passports, they don't have travel documents, there's nothing. So you went and basically got viva voce evidence from the auntie.
Yeah.
Then you got affidavits from them that you then filed in.
Yeah.
So you had an interpreter with you.
Yeah. Yeah.
You got the interpretation.
Yeah. So I had to have a NATI accredited for, the.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
So did you bring that did you find the interpreter in Denpasar and then take them to the island, or
she came that one?
Or she came from Australia? Yeah.
I had another one that was over there on one of my other trips.
Okay.
Yeah.
That's fascinating.
Incredible. It was wonderful to go to all these different parts of Indonesia that no one would
Yeah.
go to,
Yep.
Just go to Bali, to
and
yeah.
And even though you might feel that's off the beaten track, it's nothing like where you ended up.
Well,
and
one time I went to a village in Lombok, out of the way. Tourists would never go there, and there'd been like a TB,
tuberculosis,
everywhere. And I remember getting there because they don't have like garbage service things in Indonesia and these little villages. And I remember going there, and it's just the stench, garbage everywhere. When this one was so bad.
Yes.
I said, that's just like, we had to wear scarves. Like, it was really, really pungent. And we were driving past this kind of landscape of kind of mud and sludge. And the interpreter said through the other person, the Indonesian man that was taking us, but no, they are just shallow graves. And we looked over because we were actually we found out that our client's mum had died or something from tuberculosis. It was very sad because a lot of the Indonesian fisher people that came to Australia were in compression, what do you call those, compression chambers when you've got TB?
Yes.
Darwin Hospital.
Really?
A lot of them had TB. So there was a TB epidemic in this particular village, and that's what I was smelling was the freshly buried bodies.
Wow, far out. That's difficult to find that out. I mean, that's an incredible story for a first case. And very intrepid lawyering, Eddie Lloyd. And, things really haven't kind of settled down for you. I should have mentioned also at the beginning, you run your own law firm now, having worked for Blair Criminal Lawyers for a long time. And it's Lloyd Law, is it? I love alliteration, so lots of L's in the Lloyd Law lexicon. And how's that been? When did you start your own law firm, and what kind of motivated you to take that step?
Well, I moved from Sydney, from Blair Criminal Lawyers, and so I started my own practice in 2015, around 2015, 2016. Yep. I had just run a campaign in Sydney for the seat of Sydney for Labor.
Yes.
Now Green. And I just run that and lost a bit of skin. It was pretty fun. Anyone that's run a political campaign, it's pretty brutal.
And you had a very prominent member of the Labor Party as a mentor during that campaign.
Yeah, I did. Philip Bolton, SC.
I thought Tanya Plibersek, wasn't she?
Philip Bolton.
Oh, but
Philip Bolton helped do my campaign.
Oh, really? Okay. But I thought Plibersek, because of the issues her husband had, there was some connection there.
Port there.
Yeah.
Coots Trotter. When I came out on the front page of the city.
But then there was an ambush, wasn't there, with Today Tonight after that meeting?
Tonight. And I'm not even going to say what it is because I don't want anyone going to find it. It was so bad. I'm going to say it.
Okay. That's all right. You don't have to say anything.
Good.
But it was a tough campaign.
It was, yeah.
And you...
More positive than negative. I got a lot of support, overwhelming support. But it's still very hard no matter if you've got a backstory or not. Like campaigning, political campaigning.
Yes.
Very hard and everyone wants to chomp you.
I did my dash against Peter Dutton, which was not winnable at all, and it was only meant to be 6 weeks of my life. But alas, Peter stabbed Malcolm and Scotty stabbed both of them, and the election got pushed out and it turned into 10 months. So I really enjoyed it, but it was 10 months. I was frazzled at the end of it.
Right.
Yeah, and especially because there was never any prospect of winning. it was human rights lawyer versus human rights destroyer.
You've got to start. Like I've done other little pre-selection stuff, and it's interesting because if one person starts campaigning, everyone has to campaign. But if you all just go, it's a safe seat, there's no chance, and everyone just no one campaigns.
Yes.
This silent that gets made when you run campaigns. Sometimes as soon as one person puts their foot out, you're all in.
Yeah. Well, that year, 2019, it was highly contested, and the wonderful Labor I was running for the Greens. I've now quit the Greens, and that's a whole other story. But we can have a chat about that, Eddie. But the wonderful Labor candidate, Ailey France, she was running for Labor, and she actually had a prospect of defeating Peter Dutton. But alas, it didn't come to pass. What was it? Negative gearing, franking credits, and capital gains tax. And Bill Shorten sank the boat. So that was all a shame. And anyway, alas, we move on from that. And I would like to talk about your political journey as well, because now you're the second on the Senate ticket for the Greens New South Wales at the next federal election, which is very exciting. Marine Faruqi is in number 1 and you're hashtag number 2. But before we get to that, just going back about running a law firm, and I should also say, I'll add it in post that you're an accredited specialist criminal law. I did my specialist accreditation in workplace relations and industrial law before I came to the bar, and it was a lot of study, a lot of work, and I'm sure doing that for you, it was very difficult. So good on you, congratulations, high five, you're an accredited legend.
It's a while ago now, maybe even 2019.
Oh, was it? Yeah. I did it in 2020 through the Law Institute of Victoria, and there were 2 of us from Queensland, and everyone else was in lockdown for 6 months, and you just saw the deterioration. It was, that
like 25% pass.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, it's very difficult, but I really loved it because I'm a nerd, as you're a nerd. So all that's extra excuses to study. But in terms of setting up your own firm, I mean, are there any tips you'd give to people? Do you see it as, notwithstanding you get a lot of responsibility? I mean, there's an analogy with going to the bar to some degree, self-employment, working for yourself. You have a lot of freedom and flexibility to some extent or in some contexts, and then in other contexts, it's a grueling responsibility in terms of everything that you take on and all of your, outstanding extant obligations you can't kind of switch off. Well, you have to learn how to manage yourself, your life, your family commitments, making sure you have external activities, extracurriculars, things that keep you, I guess, balanced and grounded. Yeah. So how's that been for you?
Yeah, I guess the only way to discover that for me, like anything in life, is to do it the wrong way first. That's what I tend to do.
Yes.
And then I learn from my mistakes constantly. And that's always the best way to learn, I think. You shouldn't be ashamed to do that. You should always try not to make mistakes, of course. But, with the law, like I have had moments where, I've really slowed down my practice in the last 12 months. Lots of external things happen, but also the amount of work I was doing, and really complex, not so much complex law, but complex humans, with a lot of trauma.
Yes.
And you feel, in a solo practice, you're the only one. You can't really go on a holiday unless you've got other staff. And I don't like managing people, and I don't want to be managed.
Yes. The
true solo lawyer. And it's wonderful because you can pick and choose what you want to do, but then it is very difficult. You can't, they're your children. They really are. Most of the clients I have, they don't have much support around them because everyone has just had to tough love them out of their lives because of drugs or whatever. So they really depend on you, and it can be a very, very oppressive burden to carry. And I just took on too much, and I feel sorry for too many people sometimes, and I want to help too many people, but the person I don't help first is myself.
Yes.
And I guess that was the big lesson about a year ago when I just burnt out, got glandular fever, pneumonia, went to hospital,
You tag team because I've got glandular fever now. So
No time. Dropped off the gym.
Yes.
Lost too much weight. Wasn't eating right. Stressed all the time. Not sleeping, and everything just falls apart. And the first thing that fell apart was, besides my mental health, but the quality of work went down.
Yep.
Okay, and that was bad. And that's when I knew I need a break because I don't even care about these people anymore. Like that's what I got to. Like they annoyed me. My client annoyed me, and I just thought I've got to get out. Sometimes you see really cranky magistrates who are like that every day, and you wonder, like, getting paid $300,000 a year. Like, don't you want to retire now? Like, because I really believe you should only do something for as long as you love doing it. Why are you doing something? Life isn't about that. You should be always doing what you enjoy doing. And I stopped enjoying it.
Yes.
So I took time off. And I just did lots of things with my hands and gardening and reading and stuff. And now I'm writing a book. And it's taken a long time to get to where I'm at, where I've got some kind of balance. I'll never have balance if I'm an extreme person. I'm in extremes. But I have got some balance today. And it's because I've dramatically reduced my workload. I have David McBride and I do a couple of things here and there, but not much. And I don't have overhanging clients that I have to look after constantly and have on my mind. That I found to be very stressful for me and something I don't really want to do unless I've got one big client, like McBride, but otherwise I just prefer to keep it really simple because I need to be going to the gym for my mental health. And I need to be eating right and I need to spend time with my son and my friends and my family. Like, if I don't do that, then I'm going to be unhappy and I'm not going to be of service to anybody, especially myself.
And you want to, I mean, in the law, we're all, heavily reliant on our reputations, on our work. So you want to be in the most optimized condition to be able to do that. So it's such a juggle, and it's always, certainly being at the bar, certainly running your own firm, putting up, healthy boundaries to say no to things when you're at capacity. It's always a case by case because it could be the next McBride case. It could be the next case. You could get a brief from a firm. I mean, we have the cab rank rule, which helps us not say no to some extent. But, it could be a new firm. You could have a great relationship with them over the next 10 years, So there's so many factors. I've been through the same journey, both litigating for the past 15 years as a solicitor and then learning it all over again as a barrister and going through that kind of burnout and then coming back and just
having boundaries for the first time.
You want to save the world, seeking justice seekers, the world unite. We all want to save everyone for whatever reasons. And you can't do it if you're not looking after yourself, as you said. So, that helpfully brings us to you having a break, and presumably it was after that break that the McBride case came along. Can you talk about how you are now representing David McBride in the appeal to the ACT Court of Appeal? Is that right?
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah. Well, look, it's an area of law that I've always been interested in.
When you say that, you mean whistleblower law or national security?
Democracy.
Okay.
Separation of powers, and that's what I saw in his case. We can talk about that in a moment. But and lawyers and responsibility. So was a lecturer in that unit at university, professional responsibility and ethics. And I was doing a lot of kind of speeches because I was on council, so I did a lot of political speeches and participated in a lot of campaigns.
And sorry, I'm just going to do a little bit of an explainer. Well, number one, David McBride was a military lawyer, and we'll talk about his background for people that don't know. But you were also elected to the Lismore City Council when you moved up there as a Labor member. But then you became independent, is that right?
No, I stayed there till the end.
Oh, yes.
And then 5-year term because it just kept getting extended.
Yep.
And then I quit Labor when I finished the term for Labor, and then I quit and joined the Greens.
Okay. So, and that's where you are now.
Yeah.
So sorry. So,
and so I was doing a lot of Assange stuff as
yes,
people out there were. helping out in the Assange campaign with our various skills that
Yep.
we might have had. And I'd met John Shipton. He's
his father.
Him and Julian have a lovely connection with Lismore,
Yes.
where I was living over there.
Yep. Julian has a connection from his childhood, is it?
Yeah. And the home he lived in is just up for sale at the moment.
Is it?
Dramatan and North Lismore, yeah.
The Assange house.
The Assange house is
Oh, my Lord.
but it's in the flood zone. So
Oh, no, that's no good.
and it got totally smashed in the.
Oh, really? Yeah.
But anyway, John comes up to Lismore, and so I'd done a couple of events with him already,
Mm.
and I was approached by the Assange team to MC an event with him and this guy called David McBride. Who was he? And I was going through something at that point, and I didn't want to do it.
Yeah.
And I just
Healthy boundaries, was it? A healthy boundaries revamp.
stressful things in public, and so I was just about to ring up the organizer and go, let's just go.
Yeah.
And this is one of those things. It was the case, that maybe you should.
Oh, yeah.
It was like, and I contacted McBride, I think on WhatsApp, and, just asked him who he was,
Yeah.
anything about him. And I started Googling and finding out about him. And then I was talking to him, and he was very articulate and bright.
Mm.
He's a lawyer, so we had a good connection there. And so he came up to Lismore, and I did this gig. It was a fantastic gig at Starcourt Theatre. And then we just remained in contact. And so then I went down and supported him through the trial.
Yes.
He's got an assistance dog, so I got his dog accredited for him so that he could have Jakey in the trial with.
Oh.
Yeah, because Jakey and him were they're just
inseparable. Except now.
Rubs him all the time, all day to get his PTSD. Like, it's a treatment. It's like medicine. It really is.
And I've heard Jakey's actually quite gifted in writing submissions.
Oh, it's very, very, very intelligent.
Yeah. He puts it in a way that, just.
It was amazing in the case in Canberra. He sat there. You wouldn't even know a dog was there.
Did they get him robes, like little robe, a little jabot, and a little wig?
I want to put a GoPro on it.
That'd be cute.
Did close cool stuff, but no.
See where he ends up.
Yeah. So I know he sat there the whole time. So I did that.
Is that the first time you've had an animal in the courtroom that you can?
Yeah.
I've never had it. I represented a dog in Belfast trying to get back into Australia. I represented the dog's owner. I have a feeling the dog might have also been called Jake, but that was a lawsuit against the Commonwealth and the Department of Customs Immigration. And it was an AAT appeal, but also a disability discrimination case in the federal court. And it ended up resolving, but it was about the policy of the government that was said to reflect Section 9 of the Disability Discrimination Act regarding assistance animals, and it didn't, or at least we said it didn't. And this lady couldn't come back with her dog in the cabin, which seems to be a very Australian thing, because you go overseas to the States and everyone's got their little pooch or their little cat or some orangutan or whatever it is in the cabin with them, but in Australia it's not to be. But anyway, I didn't ever get the privilege of having an animal in court other than a human animal. The human animals in court. Yeah.
Humanising the whole situation, and really, I think it really rammed home to people that this is a veteran,
yes,
2 deployments in Afghanistan, and he's got PTSD, medically discharged from the army, and this is his assistance dog.
Yes.
So, and he really needed that dog.
Yes.
Probably the most devastating thing for anyone that witnessed it that day. He got sentenced and taken away. When Jakey got taken in one direction and he went in another, it was just.
And where's Jakey now?
He's with some friends in Mullumbimby.
Okay.
Yeah. So.
And how's David going without Jakey? I mean, that must have been difficult.
Well, he sleeps with a pillow, like a weighted, because Jakey sleeps with him every night.
Yes.
So he sleeps with a pillow that's quite weighted.
Yeah. Which is kind of that.
Jakey with a weighted blanket.
Yeah.
Likes to sleep.
Yeah.
So, yeah, he does that. So
he's
just coping the best he can in there.
Yeah.
He doesn't really have a choice.
And Jakey would be, well, I can't tell a dog's age from looking at it, but a youngish dog, that he'll be around for a while. So hopefully when David gets out, there'll be a lovely reunion. Yeah, which is nice. So then you were So was it the Assange team asked you to MC the event, and then David approached you to represent him, or someone?
I just kept in contact with him.
Oh, okay.
I met the family and, formed good relations with them. And
because you're between Lismore and now Byron and Sydney, because you run cases in Sydney. And I should say, with you clarifying before what kind of work you do with your firm, but I mean, I've been here for 3 days and you were in court for 2 days doing duty, solicitor, bail, that kind of stuff that you do.
Yeah.
And then you take on these big cases on this.
And mental health work at the tribunal.
Yeah. Oh, okay, yeah. Yep.
It's really interesting. Yeah, so the trial was really interesting, and I just, listened and learnt more and more about the case and stayed in touch with him. Then when he went into custody, of course, it's very normal when you've, lost.
Yes.
That you get fresh eyes on the matter.
Yes. Yep.
That's what happened there. So he chose to get fresh eyes, and he said, Eddie, I want you to do it.
And how long was the trial?
I didn't go very long. It's like 4 or 5 days.
Oh, because there was
trial arguments.
That's right. And then it went upstairs. They lost that appeal, and then he just pleaded guilty. Is that right?
Yeah. So he was charged with stealing Commonwealth property.
Yep.
And charged with communicating that 73 capital A of the Defence Act, and that charge carries life imprisonment.
Yes.
Or whatever. It's like indefinite penalty. So if hanging was on the table,
yes,
could be hung. Okay?
Wow.
There's he didn't know what. No one has ever been prosecuted for 73A.
Really?
So there was no case for.
When was that?
He would get.
When was that introduced?
1903.
Yes.
I think 1917, I think that provision was introduced. And then it was,
so it's an amending.
It was really the purpose of it, as most people would realise, would be to stop treason.
Yes.
So you're not selling state secrets to the other side and things like that. That's the reason.
Yeah.
It really
sure.
isn't fit for purpose.
Yeah.
They charged McBride with it. He was originally just charged with the Commonwealth stealing offence, and then they've gotten creative and charged.
It's just a kind of broad catch-all in a sense that they.
A 73A offence can apply to anyone in the public service.
Okay.
So it doesn't just have to be an ADF member.
Yeah.
It's anyone that is in public service communicating documents, etc. That is in line with their official duty.
Okay.
So the David McBride case was all about we need a definition for what was his official duty.
That's right.
Never been defined before.
Yes.
And so his lawyers in the lower court, the Supreme Court of the ACT, argued that he took an oath to serve Australia, and that was in the public interest. He had this duty to the public to let the public know what is really going on over there in Afghanistan.
Yes.
Some of the unlawful conduct that was going on, members in the leadership of the ADF. And he had this secondary duty that wasn't emphasised, I don't think, enough, which is means that our hands are a bit tied in the Court of Appeal, because you can only raise appeal points that were raised in the law.
Yeah.
I mean, there are different ways you can maybe get leave to get fresh evidence in, but that's a broad principle. If it wasn't brought up before, you can't just bring it up now.
No, it's a very stringent test. I'm dealing with it in a case at the moment, so it is a stringent test. Yeah,
it is. So the other duty, he had two duties. Duty because he took an oath, duty to be a soldier, representing Australia's public interest. And the other duty was duty as a lawyer.
Yes.
When you become a lawyer and you get admitted to the Supreme Court of the jurisdiction state that you're in, you are also taking on these mandatory legislative obligations in the Legal Professional Act and the conduct rules. They're legislatively mandatory. And the most important one is that you have a paramount duty to the court and to the administration of justice. And that is all about justice must be seen to be done. The public must see that justice is being done, which was everything that didn't happen in his case in the end. But they didn't really raise that very strongly, so we weren't really able to do much with it unless there's a retrial, and then we could bring it up then. But
so that, but a retrial is a prospect if he's successful in the appeal,
conviction appeal. So he they ran the duty argument in front of Judge Mossop in the Supreme Court, and unfortunately Mossop decided that he only had one duty, and that was to obey the King, and it wasn't to the public of Australia.
Okay.
And it was kind of a Nuremberg-style he was ignoring Nuremberg completely
Yes.
when he made that ruling. That he
Principles of Nuremberg.
had to obey the higher up.
But principles of Nuremberg, where you would say to kind of the distillation of the proposition is, if you're given an unlawful order, you shouldn't obey it.
Yeah,
Yep.
yeah. And that,
or what you consider to be an unlawful order,
Yeah.
you shouldn't obey that
Yeah.
unlawful order.
Yeah.
Yep.
so they went down in the duty argument. So
Yes.
it's very difficult because
And that-
would be his defence. So this was part of my duty. I had a duty to act in the public interest. Judge Mossop said, no, I will not be allowing the jury to consider
Yes.
public interest as part of your reason that you did it.
But as I recall, so Justice Mossop made that decision, made that ruling. Wasn't that then taken upstairs to the
Immediately.
appeal court?
His counsel, Stephen Odgers, immediately filed an appeal,
Yes.
interlocutory
Yeah.
appeal, I guess you'd call it, and this is what I still believe too, it should have been a stated case.
Yes.
But the process of doing that in the middle of a kind of voir dire trial is that you go straight up to the Court of Appeal and you ask them to stay the proceedings. It's called a stay application. Like, stop, don't let this trial continue until we have had the higher court decide the definition of duty.
Yes.
And it's called a stated case because a stated case is where there's never, ever, there's no precedent for
Yes.
thing in a particular area of law,
Mm.
and it needs to be defined.
Yep.
So we went into the Court of Appeal and Justice McCallum heard the application for a stay, for a stated case to happen, and she disagreed. She said, basically, this has gone on for too long, the trial. It has been around. He got charged. The offending is 24, starts in 2014. It's now 2023.
Yes. Nearly 10 years.
We've got to expedite this matter.
Yes.
Got to administer
Sure.
justice in this case. And also she felt like it needed some meat on it, the argument.
Yeah.
The duty argument. And she said it needs some facts attached to it for
the consideration. Yep.
definition of it. I disagree with that. But
Okay.
anyway, that day is past. So they lost that argument. She refused to grant a stay application. So then it went back down to
Could they have further appealed that ruling?
probably could have to the High Court. Yeah, but I don't think it would have had legs because there's discretion.
Yes.
There's discretionary factors involved in that. Then it went back down to the Supreme Court in front of Judge Mossop.
And that was all within like a day or something, wasn't it? It was very quick.
With the public interest immunity argument.
Yes.
So
under the
claim.
Public Interest Disclosure Act.
No,
and
been done.
sorry, yeah.
Tried to get that's a whole.
But under the Evidence Act.
Yeah.
Yeah.
The whistleblower.
Yes.
He assumed that he would get protection under the Public Interest Disclosure Act as people do, as every single person that has tried and failed to get protection under. The Pitt Act does not protect anyone who has, who is whistleblowing about national security matters.
Well, I mean, and
the most important matters. That should
absolutely
be ventilated.
Yeah.
And also considering, like Richard Boyle has found himself, before the courts now, he's done a plea deal because he's got no defence because preparatory acts, the gathering of the evidence, is not protected under the Pitt Act, which means you can blow the whistle on your employer, but you can just tell them. You can't do anything else. So they're going to go, oh, really? And, of course, evidence will go missing, that you need to rely on.
Yes.
It's going to disappear. It's pervert.
Oh,
that's why no one's a protection under it.
And it's just absurd. I've represented a number of whistleblowers and to my knowledge, there has been not one successful case in Australia since the uniform legislation was adopted in most jurisdictions, the Public Interest Disclosure Act of 2010s, 2013s, etc. There's been no award of compensatory damages for reprisal under the Public Interest Disclosure Act. So sadly, there've been an utter failure. And then, as you said, when these alleged national security arguments enter the fray, democracy goes straight out the window. There's nothing.
Separation of powers.
Separation of powers, out of the window. Which attracted you,
to David McBride's case, because I am passionate about protecting the separation of powers and democracy.
Yes.
And I know that in this country we have three separate powers, and that is the government, called the Parliament or the legislature, the executive, which is all of the bureaucracies, the ATO, the police,
the ADF,
all of them, who implement the laws, and then you've got the judiciary,
who interpret the laws and apply them.
There's barely any separation between the parliament and the executive, as we know. There's barely any separation there. But,
sorry, I just want to say something because, my fiance's from Puerto Rico and from the United States. And it's really interesting, something that Australians completely don't appreciate is super freaking weird, is that we have members of the legislature who are then ministers of the executive. It is so bizarre.
Attorney General, he wears 3 hats.
It's just a complete conflict.
Yeah.
In the United States, you have cabinet secretaries. They're not Congress people.
Yeah.
They're not senators.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, in some cases there might be a senator, but certainly they are just separate completely. Yeah. I mean, the appointments to make the cabinet are completely independent of the legislature. It is so anomalous, bizarre, and perhaps even subversive of the separation of powers that we have ministers of the executive who are parliamentarians. It's very strange.
The worst position is the Attorney General, who's got 3 hats.
Yes.
He's got 3. He wears all 3 hats all of the time, and that is absolute conflict, especially when you've got that is not fit for office. He's for the Parliament.
Yes.
He's also the Attorney General.
Yep. The highest legal officer. Yep.
He is also a minister.
Yeah, he's the head of and often the Minister of Justice. I've actually never seen Mark Dreyfus wear any hat, so I'd love to get him on and put some silly hats on him.
He's got.
Yeah.
Anyway, so they went back down to the court to do this public immunity argument, and this is where the separation of powers starts to break down. That's what is so frightening to me. So, yes, we all accept that there's barely any line between the politicians and the executive and the AFP and the ADF and the ATO. Yes, okay. But there's always been a pretty healthy boundary between those two and the judiciary.
Yes.
Courts.
Yes.
Which we need in a functioning democracy. And the most important reason we need that is if there's been an overreach in the law or the implementation of the law by the Parliament or by the executive, the AFP, ADF, then we turn to the courts to administer justice. They're the last
the bulwark against tyranny.
And if we don't have the judiciary to turn to, there is no accountability.
Yes.
We are living in an autocracy.
Yes.
We are not living in a democracy anymore. And that is what happened in David McBride's case, because when they went to do the public interest immunity arguments and when they did the application for protection under the Pitt Act years before, the Attorney General comes in with his superpower, to remove evidence from the court.
Yes.
Not even the judge can see it.
Wow. So the judge can't even overrule the Attorney General's prerogative to do whatever the heck they want to do.
With is exactly what they want you to be left with in terms of the evidence. Now,
yes.
I might sound a little bit conspiratorial, but I've been around a long time and I've been in politics and I know how.
Yes.
And the narrative that has been left of David McBride has sometimes been quite manipulated and adverse against him. And that is because of the evidence that has been cherry-picked to be left under national security protections and the evidence that has been allowed to be made public.
And as with any high-profile case, there's the trial in the court, and then there's the trial by media. So public perception is very important. And
especially in this case, where what we saw again was the secret court.
Yes.
Where all of these arguments about the evidence were done in secret, like the public were not allowed to see it. So there goes, justice must be seen to be done.
And
it's not there. You can't see it. And that the result was a grave injustice to this man. That is what has happened. That is what.
But perhaps also a grave injustice to our democracy, because my question is, if the Attorney General exercises the invocation of the national security argument, and then the secret court is held, can anyone challenge the invocation of national security? Like, can you challenge the fact that, well, actually there's no, so it can't be challenged. So it could just be.
Let's talk about it.
It could be on
The courts aren't even allowed to see it to assess it.
So an arbitrary and ad hoc basis, it could be invoked and no one's got the right to challenge it. There's no procedural fairness. There's no natural justice. There's nothing.
It is just what they say. This is not in the national interest. This is a danger to the, national security. They just say that. And not all judges will accept that and they can look at it in cases, but this particular judge didn't think he needed to look at it. He just trusted what the government said. So what that meant was for David McBride is he lost the duty argument and he lost all of his evidence. He was left standing there with a blank piece of paper, redactions all the way through it. And the Commonwealth didn't even want paper with redactions handed to the jury if he ended up proceeding, because that was bad for them to have big black lines. They just said just white paper.
Well,
I think it was perverse.
But I thought it was because they were carbon neutral. They didn't want the paper given their commitment to climate change. That's it. It sounds trite to say how Kafkaesque the whole thing is.
That's why the court of public opinion
is so important. Yeah, and I guess to keep in check, as well the exercise of those powers by the Attorney General. But it's interesting to me. I think I've been watching a lot of podcasts in the past year since the genocide began in Gaza, which is one of the reasons I've ended up reluctantly starting this podcast finally after being told for many years, you should start a podcast. And so here I am and here you are. Thank you. But it seems to me that I think I was watching Pulitzer Prize winning war correspondent Chris Hedges, and it might have been Professor Jeffrey Sachs, but certainly since 9/11 and the Twin Towers attack, the aggressive advance of the national security state in Western countries has been, without precedent. And so the arguments, because, way back when I was a junior lawyer and I was I began doing work with Australian Lawyers for Human Rights, Brett Walker SC was the independent national security monitor, and I did a lot of work feeding into him, and I also appeared at some COAG inquiries and panels about terrorism laws, and I was absolutely shocked that when I was going in there in good faith as a true believer in human rights and the fact that the rule of law might work in the system, and I was just making pretty basic arguments against the encroachment by these terrorism laws, the panel basically was saying, are you with us or against us? Like, you're with the terrorists. Like, that was, and I was just, and I was with the terrorists kind of thing. And it was just, but
an issue with the rule of law being,
but these were, and the panel was made up of like eminent jurists. Like, it was really like,
who know better than us? So this is
what happened to the, but
in Gaza at the moment. It's like we all believe in human rights and rule of law until
there's an exception. Yeah.
It's always going to be an exception if it comes for us, and we will break whatever rule of law we need to. And that's what we see with the government.
And that and so that's the same as though as you said before, I mean, let's talk about was it Witness K and Bernard Collaery? Like, how embarrassing was that information for the government about...
Pulled the prosecution because not to air would be an admission that it was happening.
Yeah, but incredibly embarrassing. And so let's then invoke national security because we're embarrassed about things. And so then tracing this full circle, as you've just said, no one can question or challenge, even with an independent Chapter 3 court, the invocation of national security by the Attorney General. So if the government of the day wants to cover up embarrassing conduct, they can just get away with it.
Security card.
Yeah.
And that, I think, is unconstitutional. I think that is a breach of the separation of powers, and that is potentially something that the High Court might be interested in if we lose David McBride's appeal on the 3rd of March.
Yes.
He wants to head on down with the convoy down to Canberra.
So 3rd of March in
We're at the Court of Appeal.
And how long is it listed for?
It's for one.
For 1 day, yep. And who?
Deliver judgment that day.
Yeah. And who have you got briefed for that?
I have got two amazing counsel
Yep.
brief. I have got Kieran Gingas,
Yep.
who has done a lot of work in this area of national security.
Yes.
Very, very bright.
And he's at the bar in ACT in Canberra. Yeah.
He's a very senior junior.
Yes.
And then we've got Bill Neal, senior counsel, who's at Forbes Chambers in Sydney. And
Yes.
worked with him extensively on a lot of people smuggling matters, actually.
Excellent.
Incredible.
Yep.
He's very, very, very bright.
Yes.
And he, he's not afraid. He's fearless.
Yeah.
He's a fearless barrister.
As one should be. As one should always be.
It should be.
Indeed. And, acting in the best interests of your client.
Yeah.
In adherence with all the ethical rules, of course, but certainly making robust arguments.
Yeah.
And putting the best case forward. So, look, that'll be really interesting to keep track of how that goes.
Yeah.
And I'm sure the justice seekers out there among us, and certainly I wish you all the best, and maybe I can even make it down there for it, because that would be really exciting.
He wants to read David's book.
We do.
He's got his own website, so you can go on there and buy his amazing.
The camera's over in the background there.
And also donate to his fundraiser.
Yeah.
For his legal fees.
And so I wanted to ask about that. So, I mean, ostensibly and effectively, you've taken this as a pro bono matter, but obviously, if you can get paid, you can pay the rent, you can buy food, you can eat, and all of those wonderful things.
When I decided to, I'll just do it pro bono if there's not enough money raised, it was really because I kind of felt dirty being paid for it.
Yes.
I felt so strongly about this case.
It goes to the bedrock principle of democracy, as you said.
It's almost like, but no, I do need to pay my bills, so it would be good to get paid.
Well, and can I just go to that? Because just before we get off the topic of what we were just talking about with the judges and the national security, I have to kind of laugh and remark, I got you to watch Citizen 4 last night about Edward Snowden in real time being filmed by documentary maker Laura Poitras and Glenn Greenwald in the hotel in Hong Kong with the Rubik's Cube. Like, it's just John le Carré on steroids. It's incredible. I love it. I get goosebumps. I've watched it 5 times now. But you were remarking when we were watching it, because there was a argument in court that was filmed, and it was before an appeal court and against the NSA, and it was about the spying on American citizens. And there was a challenge to that, and the attorney turned up for the NSA, and he was with his bow tie, and he was talking
Smithers?
And he was saying to the judges, we don't think that this really needs to be considered by the judiciary. I mean, this is just let the executive take care. It's fine. Just don't worry about it. It'll be okay. And what was the judge's response? Because that was quite amazing, wasn't it?
Are you saying that the judiciary to do? Saying you don't need us.
Yeah.
We have a role in these proceedings.
And especially the older judge on the screen. He was brilliant. Yeah. Yeah, he was just like, what are you... Yeah, exactly. Yeah, and it was just...
Of everything.
But the fact that arguments were being made like that, I mean, the hubris and the arrogance...
The Trump era, though, that's where people just can get away with that. This is how things...
No, but I don't think that was the Trump era. I don't think that was
2013.
But that's just the national security state in the US. Like, the law doesn't apply to us. Like, what are you talking about? Come on, wink, wink, nudge. Yeah, wink, wink, nudge, nudge. Come on, let's get it sorted. So, so strongly recommend justice seekers out there, Citizen 4. I think there was a feature film made, but the actual documentary is amazing. You can watch it on YouTube. It is so good. And
attention to what's going on here.
Yes. Well, and sorry, the parallels with David McBride's case, you were quite, you were like kind of gasping, going, oh my God, there's so much similar.
Recently on what you're saying about Smithers in the Snowden thing, recently I was watching Senate estimates, and they were, people were giving evidence, the Bar Association of Australia, the Law Council of Australia were giving evidence on this new unexplained wealth legislation.
Oh, yes.
Where part of the legislation, what it means is that lawyers, if they have a client,
yes,
and barristers, if they have a client come forward and there's a bit of a whiff of how they're paying, there's a little bit too much cash there or whatever, that lawyers under this legislation have a duty to stop acting for them and dob on them.
Yes, which is like
this whole structure set up in their little solo practice in case they get someone like that.
Yep.
And dob on them, like become informants.
Yep.
Yeah, it's like
yes, which undermines the whole independence.
Attack on democracy.
Yeah.
That's the attack in the judiciary, like.
Yep.
And with lawyers, turn everything into an autocracy because it's just easier to control.
And turn everyone into an informant potentially. Yep.
Yeah.
And so you said the Bar Association.
Oh, she was just talking about the separation of powers, like the 101 of learning your first year, even year 10 legal studies. Like she was, I mean, you should watch it. She
I will.
was shaking in her voice. She was so aghast. And there's a transcript as well, but you should watch her because she was like shaking, like it's actually happening. And that reported, nobody's, the fourth estate are just part of the government.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah. Insiders, David Spears, we're on to you. Insiders are insiders, as I've heard some international commentators but international commentators just laugh at the press gallery in Australia because they're insiders. They're all just beholden to the government of the day to get their secrets.
Very annoying because they're all breaching their main ethical obligation, which is to report facts objectively, fearlessly, without favour.
And your favourite?
In the public interest. And they're just doing whatever because they're going to give someone a scoop because they're going to keep that job in the press gallery or whatever. Like,
or make a nice, what is it? Carbonara at home. Annabelle Crabb, I think, is your favourite journalist, isn't she? Investigative culinary journalist.
Expensive.
Indeed. So we've got the pro bono case, you've got counsel presumably acting pro bono, but there's also a crowdfund. Now, we were also watching the wonderful Boy, Alexa and Alex from Boy, doing the amazing video on Chevron and Stephen Donziger, the fearless US lawyer who's been in a 30-year legal battle with Chevron and ended up judicial corruption, being locked up in his house, lost everything, being sued for $60 billion. Check out that video because Boy,
their best video.
Are brilliant. Well, the Pine Gap one is pretty good, but I also did get busted breaking the Pine Gap, so I do have a warm place in my heart for Pine Gap. I was never charged, I have to say, and I was never and thus not being charged, never convicted, but I did have to disclose that for my admission to the legal profession. And to the bar, and I have a nice letter that I should get framed from the feds, I think basically saying you've been a very naughty boy and if you do it again, you'll be in a lot of trouble. But in this case, we're letting you go. And actually, my friend who was involved in that with me, he's a barrister at the Sydney bar and he does criminal work, but he also represents climate protesters, and I do want to get to that. But just before we finish on the wonderful David McBride, so we were watching the Boy episode and Stephen Donziger, and at the end Alexa was talking about they did a crowdfund and in 3 days they made $90,000 for David McBride.
For the appeal, they said.
Yeah, I think so. So what's the update with that $90,000 and how much does it cost to run an appeal like this? How's the crowdfund going? And if people want to contribute, where can they go?
Well, we didn't get $90,000 for the appeal. I don't know where that went.
Okay.
It didn't. It's not being provided to his new legal team, so I can't explain.
Okay.
Unexplained wealth.
So maybe we can phone a friend. We'll call Alexa from Boy and try and find out what happened to that. Yes.
And how much does it cost?
How much does it cost, and also what do?
It depends. It depends who you have. I have to just put it out there because people assume that pro bono means shit, means crap representation.
Yes,
it actually doesn't, because people like my team who are in it for the right reasons, and that's who you want in your case, whether you am or not. That's who you want. But more often than not, if you've got someone that really gets it and really wants to get justice, they are not going to be so concerned with money. And that's how our team is approaching David McBride because it's a very important public interest case. But because of what's happened, we do turn to the public to fund this very important public interest case.
Yes.
So we have raised some money and been able to pay the bills to date.
Yep.
Coming up to the appeal, we're trying to get to about 175,000.
Yes.
Would be great.
Yep.
And so we've got a way to go on his Chuffed fundraiser, which you can just Google Chuffed David v. Goliath. You can put the link.
Oh, David v. Goliath.
Yeah, that's what the fundraiser is called because it is a real David and Goliath.
Yeah.
You know, and we don't want David turning up with some little knives to gunfight. You know, we want to make sure that he's armed and ready.
Yes.
He's not just in the court against the Commonwealth DVP.
Yes.
He's got the Australian government solicitor there as well. There's a whole heap.
Well, he's against the military-industrial complex to some extent, isn't it?
Whereas it's just a very oppressive situation where he is really David in this Goliath battle.
And if anyone can decipher this amazing mind map on the board behind, you can find out you can join the team and you can find out what it's really about. But did you want to talk? I mean, I'm not sure if you can kind of.
Such a big case.
You gave me a wild tour, a lecture, a CPD. I can mark it down as a point because it went for about an hour and a half, and it ended. I mean, this is a work of art as far as I'm concerned.
You know, like sometimes you have a case that is so complex that no matter how many times you do kind of excel chronologies, because chronologies is the answer, everybody out there who wants to be a lawyer and a good lawyer. If you do a chronology, all the answers get exposed in the chronology. I've done so many.
And learning Excel.
Yeah,
but
I didn't learn Excel.
But if you ask Eddie, if you just give her a date from the last 10 years, she'll tell you it's got some relevance to the McBride case.
It's time read a lot, and all of this is all publicly available.
Yes.
It's just taken me a long time to kind of stitch it all together.
Yep.
So any investigative journalist out there, I'm happy to talk to you, but it's all already out there, you know, because what I found, the more and more I got involved in the case, it's not about David McBride. It's about democracy. It's about who runs this country. It's about the strong influence that the military has in democracy. That's meaning that our democracy is not so much a democracy anymore.
Yes.
It's an autocracy, and the ADF would love it to be. And, of course, there are some very good people.
And the amount of influence that is kind of exercised or deployed even to make things happen in a particular way.
Really, this is the beginning of the journey for David McBride was, 2014, 2013, 2014. I won't go into it today because it's too long. But basically he was being a lawyer and asking questions about the law.
Yes.
And he knew things were not right.
Yep. And this was in relation to the operations in Afghanistan.
Yeah, like the rules of engagement getting changed. And he said, you don't need to change them. They're fine. Something's up. Why are you suddenly wanting to change them? This is 2013. 2012, we know, was, a very difficult year for the ADF in Afghanistan with
multiple deaths.
Allegations of Ben Robert Smith and cold-blooded, murdered people.
Yes.
And suddenly the rules of engagement get changed and everyone is in on it, CDF Hurley was in on it. Angus Campbell knew about the rules being changed anyway.
But David, being a lawyer,
had a duty as a lawyer.
Yeah, but he's
a government lawyer.
Yeah, but he also specialised in international humanitarian law, rules of engagement, etc. So he would train soldiers in the rules of engagement, and the rules of engagement, you said, was quite an extensive dossier with a lot of amendments over time. But what was peculiar when the rules of engagement got changed in this case is that there was no training.
No training after.
There was no training. So why was there no training?
Well, why was the rules of engagement changed?
Why? Do you know the answer?
Yes, I do.
You do?
Yes, I do.
Okay, can you tell us here? Breaking news, exclusive.
Just go and ask CDF earlier. I'm not going to speculate on here, but I think it's pretty obvious that 2012, a lot of unlawful killings allegedly happening. All of a sudden, 2013, they're changing all the rules.
Yes.
And everything's just changing in the ADN.
Yep.
But no one is prosecuted in 2012. To today, no one has been prosecuted.
For any of those crimes.
Any of those, except for Oliver Shook.
Yes.
He's been charged with murder and he's before the court doing contempt.
And this is all coming out of the Brereton inquiry?
Yeah.
to some extent.
Yeah, to some extent.
But there were a number of inquiries that happened. And interestingly, I mean, I'm an international human rights lawyer, advocate, amongst other things. I've been involved in drafting complaints to the International Criminal Court. A number of my colleagues during my Oxford Masters were prosecutors at the International Criminal Court. We had special rapporteurs teaching our classes, etc. So I know, and also from other complaints, I've acted for people who have made complaints to international treaty bodies, Human Rights Committee, the various committees for the different international treaties for the UN. You have to, in order to access those complaints mechanisms, you need to exhaust domestic remedies and jurisdictions. And oftentimes you might not actually run a case because it's too difficult, and it's just obvious that you're just not going to get any traction or action in running the case domestically. So what you can do to kind of fast track it is you can get an advice from a senior counsel and a junior counsel, in my case, me, that basically says there's no prospect of success in a domestic jurisdiction.
Get your entry ticket into the international.
Exactly. So when all these inquiries were going on, the Brereton inquiry, did you say there was the OSI? It was
set up.
There was a number of, but I mean, presumably that meant that there was no
prima facie way to get into the international court to make a complaint about the leadership, which has been David McBride's case, okay?
About the leadership, about the generals.
Agreed.
Yes.
Any soldier that has done a lawful killing should face the full forces of law.
Yes.
There's no doubt about it.
Of course.
But I'm sorry, like the Yamashita principle, it's the leadership that are ultimately responsible. So when the Brereton inquiry was set up about all the rumours were coming out about the unlawful killings, they only did the low-hanging fruit.
Yes.
It was set up in a way where evidence was compelled in an inquisitorial style so that when they found all of the 19 people responsible for 39 unlawful killings, all, behind closed doors, none of that, if any of that evidence, and most of it was compelled by that person, it cannot be used
in a criminal prosecution. Yeah.
And so what the Office of Special Investigator is doing now after the inquiry is they are quarantining, what was compelled and what wasn't compelled, see what they can and can't prosecute.
Yes.
And to date, we've only had one person prosecuted, Oliver Schultz, and I don't believe that came from evidence from the Brereton inquiry. If anyone remembers Mark Willis's report.
With the helmet cam. Shooting of the farmer.
Intellectually disabled farm field.
Yes.
That's objective evidence of an unlawful killing.
But there was something about the helmet cam footage was not even referred to in the field report of the killing. Is that right?
Well, that's correct. Yeah. No one had ever heard about this before. It came out on 2018, 2019 when it came out on TV. So the OSI has been set up and they've been around for years now as well. So prima facie, while the member state of an ICC, like Australia,
Rome Statute,
International Criminal Court, whilst the member state are doing, like you said, domestic,
an inquiry and dealing with it,
some kind of inquiry,
there's no basis. Yeah,
the other court, but because that's what McBride wants them to go to the other court, and lots of other people do.
Senator Jackie Lambie.
I'm interested in the leadership.
Yes.
Because
that's the principle. Yeah, and the doctrine and the principle of command responsibility.
Did know.
Yes.
It's whether you ought to have known.
Yes.
Should have known about it. That's the Yamashita principle.
Yep.
And that's the principle that is held in the international court to get the command. So some cynical people have said that the Afghanistan inquiry and the OSI have just been a little bit of a way to prevent the invitation made to that court to consider an investigation of the command leadership. And to this date, no one has been held accountable for that in the leadership for any of the alleged, 39 unlawful killings. Not one person.
Which is very bizarre in the sense that
when you've got all of these people who are, it's very top-heavy military, the ADF. There's very few people, there's more people in charge of fewer people than any other army in the world. So they knew of course they knew what was going on. There's people like Angus Cam and Hurley, who in all of those years were unlawful. behaviour and murders were happening.
Yep.
There.
And
They must have known. And even if they didn't know, they ought to have known, and they should be taken to the international court to face the full force of the law.
Well, and to exercise their right to mount a defence, but to deal with any allegations. And one of my instructing solicitors from Sydney, the wonderful Dr. Glenn Colometes, he did his PhD in command responsibility, and he assisted Senator Jackie Lambie. So I'll have to get him on to find out what the update is on that. He's recently been deployed off to Ukraine as a war crimes investigator, and he does incredible work, and he's an absolute legend. We love you, Glenn, and all of your tireless advocacy for veterans, being a veteran yourself, and a former police officer as well. But
the Senate for the Jackie Lambie Party.
And now running for the Senate for the Jackie Lambie Party.
Shout out to Jackie Lambie. She does do
she does amazing. Yeah, indeed.
The Senate would as well.
And so you guys can be cross bench.
First, like number one on the ticket when you're doing it.
Yeah. You guys can be crossbench buddies, CBBs, they call it, when you're in, well, I just made that up. But you can certainly do that. So, yes, look, we'll get to the bottom of where the crowdfund money has gone. Other people will invest in democracy by making a contribution. It's not a donation. It is an investment in this important work because, as Eddie said, this is not just about David. Obviously, it's about his liberty. It's about his rights. It's about the courageous stand that he took. But this is also about our democracy, and bedrock principles are related to that, which is why it's so important. And
I just want to say, we're not suggesting that Boy have taken the money and run.
Oh, no, of course not. No. They've done amazing work, and they do
great video for David.
Yeah, it's hilarious. Everyone should check that out as well. They're in the shower, they're in their dressing gowns, they're looking resplendent. But no, I think it's just a point to clarify, because in the Stephen Donzi video we were watching, it said that $90,000 had been raised in 3 days, and there's just a question. So that's fine. We can deal with that. And so I'm noting the time. I mean, we could talk for days, Eddie. We have already, and we have been talking literally for 3 days. Whilst we've been doing our various work, everything else, we've got all these books here. I brought down a suitcase of books because I'm a book addict, and I wanted to, I'm trying to run a podcast and I don't really know what I'm doing. So I figure you just let everyone know how learned you are by having all your books up. But also, as Eddie was saying, if you're nerds like us, when you watch a podcast and someone's got books in the background, you pause it and you zoom in and you find out you have a sticky beak on what kind of books they're into.
Maybe just you and I do that. Maybe that's a bit embarrassing.
It's called it's called book voyeurism, I think. Libri voyeur, or something like that. I don't know. There would be a Latinism for it that we can make up at a later date. Look, so we're
climate
we're busting through it.
Forest logging or anything.
No. We're going to do that. That's where we're going next. There's no part two. Inspiration from Joe Rogan and all the tech bros who sit around all day and just watch 3-hour podcasts. Love Lex Friedman, of course. But yeah, the 3-hour podcast. I know that Travis Kelce's sister recently did a podcast, and she said because she's a busy mum, she's going to make it 45 minutes because she doesn't have time to just loll around like the
Look, I loll around when I listen to podcasts.
I walk. Yeah.
I love listening to podcasts.
Exactly, me too. So I mean, that's part of the inspiration, and I'm going to do an intro about what motivated me to do this one. And it's such a delight to have you on as an early guest in the first interview, indeed. In fact, it might be the first episode. It depends on what happens with my lawyer in Gaza, who is going to be my first guest, and we're just working all of that out through fastidious networking on LinkedIn. Hopefully LinkedIn will come in and sponsor the podcast, because there's been a lot of networking on LinkedIn to get this podcast off the ground. But yeah, I did that. The other topics, just to kind of narrow it down, that I wanted to talk to you about. the climate chaos. You're on the front lines of the Lismore floods. You end up representing Violet Coco. She was sent to prison for holding a flare on the Sydney Harbour Bridge. You also, and I didn't realise this because I come from my kind of entry into non-violent direct action, as it were, was being involved in the forest blockades in southwestern Australia. I grew up partially in Melbourne, partly in Perth. And my first girlfriend at UWA, her father was the Chief Justice of Hong Kong. Her mother was a lawyer from the UK who set up Friends of the Earth in Hong Kong, and they were then in Perth. But it was kind of their influence that got us into the forest protests, and then we deferred uni and we went down to the camps. And I had no idea that you had been representing forest protesters in northern New South Wales, but also you've got like you could even pitch this on Shark Tank, like a forest protester lawyer pack, strategy pack. You represent them, but it's also about, I mean, you going out there and being a police liaison with just to make sure things
you don't
run smooth.
Some people just get up a tree and then they call the media, and the media don't come out most of the time. So they're Facebooking videos. But when I run campaigns like environmental campaigns, I have a bit of a strategy. I've got like a social welfare strategy for the person themselves to make sure that they're carried through that experience safely on an emotional and a physical level. We have a political strategy and a legal strategy and a media strategy. And the political strategy is about communicating with your local member or someone who is in that kind of area in Parliament and seeing what they're up to, what's coming up, what they might be introducing, what debate might be happening. Can they introduce something? So you tie it up with them, you let them know what you're doing. So you're working together all the time. You do it, in synchronicity. And so you also have a media strategy. Never count on the media being there, obviously. So you make sure that you've got good footage. And usually you'll get media afterwards. And you've got your legal strategy, which is they're all just as important as each other, and they all have a role to play. And you don't always go to win in court. Like a lot of these environmental campaigns are really about drawing attention. It's just another moment. You're at court now. You can have a protest there. You can invite the media. The people that are signing up for these things, I give legal talks to them saying what their risks are in terms of conviction and what that might mean. Most of the protesters that I represent don't get on planes anyway, so they're not worried if they've got, but usually it's just a fine-only offence, and it's so important that they...
But this is, and sorry, just to clarify for the audience, this is when there's logging happening in a particular forest. There might be endangered species there. There might be a question as to whether regulations are being followed.
And there's also the necessity, So in Queensland, you've got the extraordinary climate emergency. Well, not a climate emergency, extraordinary defence.
Yes.
Extraordinary emergency defence.
Which I ran in a climate case and completely failed. So we've destroyed that.
You've got necessity, and it's just no one's ever got up on it. But you still have to keep...
Well, in the UK... So this is the strategy with necessity. I've worked it out because we had a judge sitting alone, and I can talk more about what happened, but the wonderful client was a geography teacher from Victoria, very committed Christian, and he set up a tripod on the Horizon train line to stop the Adani coal being shipped overseas effectively, climate change. And he actually sat up, like this was way before any lawyers got involved. He set up his tripod with a big banner saying this is an act of self-defense because he'd looked at the law and he had then gone along in the Bowen Magistrates Court and represented himself. Good on him. He actually called one of the authors of the IPCC climate reports to give expert evidence in the Bowen Magistrates Court, who was cross-examined by a police prosecutor who might have been not that enamoured with the idea of climate change because reading the transcript was quite hilarious. And that was Professor Brendan Mackey, of course, from Griffith University. But the client, and he got a lot of media, he got international media, he was in Al Jazeera, The Guardian, International, etc. But he went down, and then I came on as his lawyer. He briefed the wonderful Kylie Hillard, and I think there was a junior barrister involved, and so it went. But effectively the wash up of the trying to use the extraordinary emergency defence, Section 25 of the Criminal Code. I think Queensland Criminal Code was, the kinds of cases where that has been successful, for example, was someone driving down Lutwich Road, going through numerous red lights because they were being chased by a car full of neo-Nazis. Whereas in this case, our client had given evidence that he'd been aware of climate change for 30 years. So the kind of logical deduction from that was, well, it's taken you 30 years to come and get arrested. That's not really an extraordinary emergency. But I just
think
yeah.
My necessity defence that kind of came to me when I was on my feet, as sometimes that happens.
Yes.
When I've got, these cases, you don't, like I said, it's not wise just to put anyone up the tree, some young person up the tree. It doesn't. It just does not work. Okay.
Yes.
So we have these workshops in the forest, beautiful workshops. We have an ecologist that comes out and talks about that specific area and specific species that are at threat there, what their classification is.
Yes.
Sometimes we camp out the night before and record yellow-bellied monitors or whatever it might be. So we have an ecologist, there's a media person there, and we all do talks. I do a legal talk about your rights. And so everyone is fully prepared if they want to step into that tree set. And so then when they're in the tree, they're doing it for a reason. They know exactly what species tree that they're in.
Yes.
And the meaning of that tree, all about the how they relate the threat to the endangered species to the necessity defence.
Yes.
And so obviously ran the normal, necessity style defence where it was necessary. These people had faced floods in Lismore.
Just to be clear, in New South Wales, this is the necessity defence in the common law because you don't have codified.
It's like a Loudoun is the leading case, and I think that's about a prisoner who was getting threatened, I think, in prison, and he murdered another prisoner because he couldn't, that was he was kind of in defence of necessity.
Yes, because he was going to get killed otherwise.
He's done something else.
Yeah.
There's some other step he could have taken to avoid going to that. And that's kind of what the courts believe the authority is, but there's a lot of jurisprudence from overseas that I research where the timeliness, the immediacy of the necessity and the immediacy, like in yours, doesn't have to be right now.
Exactly, yeah. There's a way you can interpret the language of the...
My clients, I had two of them. We had the hearing the same day. They were both impacted by the flood, okay? And I stood up and said at one point, Your Honour can take judicial notice because the prosecutor was saying, there was no fire.
Yeah.
There was not going to be a fire in the forest. How unlikely is that? And I stood up and said, well, Your Honour can take judicial notice that not even the Bureau of Meteorology predicted the floods in Lismore.
Yes.
This is what's happening in climate change. Events are just happening.
Well, look at LA. Look at LA on fire today.
I don't even know that. Not even our experts can predict what's going to happen. There could have been a fire that But look, we're talking about local court New South Wales regions. They're not going to buy any argument like that, It's just... So I'd like to work on that argument a little bit more because I think it had a lot of merit to it, in the unpredictability of climate change.
Yes.
We really need a proper defence, but that's not going to happen. So if we can kind of...
Well, can I say that in my research in comparative jurisdictions, particularly in the UK but also in the US, there are a number of cases where climate activist protesters have been acquitted of charges, but in all of those cases, they had a jury of their peers. And see, we didn't have that we didn't even have that option because it wasn't an indictable offence; it was only a summary offence. So we were our client was before a magistrate, and then on appeal before the district court.
But you don't have to consent to the summary jurisdiction.
Yes,
you can say I want a trial, even if summary.
So if you can have a jury of inner city latte sippers in Sydney or Brisbane or whatever, then there might be a prospect of an acquittal.
Well, I nearly got there with the knitting nanas. I'm going to do at one point for them. Can you imagine the knitting nanas on trial?
It's amazing. Well, and maybe they could teach the jury members how to knit, so everyone could just be knitting.
Just strategy, because you've got to make sure that they're not going to go to,
Yes.
They're aware if there is gel on the table, if there's a risk that they need to be praised of that.
Well, we had
in certain circumstances.
We had the Parliamentary 14 up in Queensland.
Violet was there with you?
Yes.
Yeah, there.
So there was a protest outside the Magistrates Court, but I was peripherally involved in that and looking into a potential implied freedom of political communication challenge to the law. But effectively what happened there, it was interesting because there were 14 people in the public gallery of the Queensland Parliament and a unicameral parliament. I don't know, I'm not a Queenslander, but I figure most people in Queensland don't realise that there's an upper house in most other jurisdictions, which I think also is a bulwark against the radical pendulum swings of our elections, where you get these landslides back and forth, certainly since I've been in Queensland, where it's, all Labor or it's all Liberal, LNP, all Labor, all LNP, and we're swinging back in the other direction now. But the eldest person who got arrested was 89 years old, and most of the parliamentary 14 were over 50. And it was really remarkable because a lot of them were very upstanding citizens. And I think the optics of that, when you're not just a kind of dirty young protester, it's interesting the reception one gets in court when you've, had a successful career in your life. And I think that's happening more and more often. And I think there were look, I was fascinated with that case.
But they get a bond, like a good behaviour bond. It's so...
Oh, yeah.
It's like I can't stand...
So you can't do anything else.
And said, Your Honour, my client, there's a penalty in New South Wales called conviction no further penalty. It's Section 10, capital A. Right now, when you're a lawyer, you're always trying not to get a conviction for your client every single time until it comes to these kind of protests. Like, they don't want a bond hanging over their head for the next 2 years to be of good behaviour, meaning if they breach it and do another climate action, they're going to be in big trouble.
So, which means they get charged with the original... Sorry.
They get resentenced.
Resentenced for the original one and the secondary one.
Your Honour, Miss Lloyd, I'm thinking about a no conviction good behaviour bond. You got nothing to say about that? And I said, well, yes, Your Honour, actually, my instructions are my client would prefer a conviction and a fine.
Yes.
No further penalty.
Yep.
And the magistrate's face was like, oh, everyone, you think, you're not wanting a non-conviction.
Yeah.
So I don't care. It's like a conviction for a fine-only offence anyway. Like,
yes,
to go overseas, it's not going to impact them. They're an ecologist. They're never working for the police or ASIO. Like, and I had to argue for a conviction that day.
Oh, my God.
Because she was not going to do, which was the Section 10 dismissal. Actually, I did get Section 10 dismissal ×3 for that one. But was arguing in that if not complete dismissal, then a conviction and no further penalty. She was shocked. But
so now might be a good time to just move quickly to, what was your motivation for leaving the Labor Party, going to the Greens? Again, I was involved with the Greens. I actually worked at a national firm that was very involved with the Labor Party. I grew up in Kooyong, in the electorate of Kooyong, in Melbourne, well, Teal now, but Josh Frydenberg's electorate, and certainly one of the most blue-blooded electorates in Australia. And my dad was on the state council for the Victorian Liberal Party. He was on the election campaign for Andrew Peacock. I think he was the chair of the East Hawthorn Liberal Party chapter or whatever it was. My grandparents were in the Labor Party. They joined the DLP to kind of divert away from the communists. And I feel like everyone kind of rebels. So then I ended up joining the Greens, of course. But I did work at a very heavily oriented Labor firm. But anyway, and I was asked to run as a Teal. My response to that was, A, I'm not female, and B, sure, I'd be interested, but, that might be something kind of stopping me. But, that the campaign before was grueling, as we discussed, and I wasn't that keen to kind of get back in the I've had massive admiration for people getting into the fray and people being in there, and I do appreciate the diversity of the crossbench, and I think it's really important for our democracy, and I think minority governments are really important for our democracy. And effective, exactly, and legislatively effective, that is so. And so can you just talk about, and I also wanted to ask you about representing, because Violet Coco, as I said before, she went to prison. So what's the motivation for you regarding,
Labour. Moving.
well, yeah, and being in the Greens, obviously working on climate change issues, and what happened with Violet Coco, the famous protester?
I was living in Lismore.
Yes.
I was on council as a Labor councillor, and in 2017 we got hit with some very devastating floods, the first lot of floods, and then again 2022. And I worked a lot in the drug law reform sector as well. It was part of the decriminalisation roundtable headed by the lovely commissioner and Sally Dowling, councillor sister with DPP.
Yes.
State GPP. And so I was just getting more and more outraged at Labor.
Yes.
But I had this thing that I've seen a lot of people seem to be experiencing in Labor, which is this kind of Labor loyalty thing.
Yep.
And because I was on council, I didn't want to leave because they got me on council. You just can't win whether you leave early or leave.
Yep.
I waited to the end of there. And then I got out and I wrote them a letter because I thought, I'm going to tell you why. I'm going to give you some feedback. So I sent an email to the Labor address I had in my email, and it was, just basically all you guys care about is blowing up each other's assholes, and it was quite full on. And you don't care about drug law reform, blah, 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 blah. But it was a lot about, fossil fuels and climate change and dirty donations and political lobbyists and things like that. And I'm just like, I'm done. And send that off. It felt so good. And then I just got like a bounce back, email.
Like sorry, not a bounce back, but an automated response. Thank you for your feedback.
And then they said,
we'll take it on board.
They finally took me off as a member. They sent me like a survey to fill out. I'm like, I'm not filling out a dumb survey.
Yep.
More information.
Yes.
Anyway, so I left that, and I think I live and breathe the 4 pillars, and it was.
And what are the 4 pillars?
Pillars are peace and non-violence, ecological.
And does that mean a number of kumbayas each day?
It does.
How many?
It does.
20?
20.
We've got a very bad in-joke about 20, but that will come apparent when we do our upside down shadow work. What is it called? The Upside Down Stranger Things podcast. That's that's starring Barbie and who is it? Greg? No.
Greg and Barbie. No, Jerry and Barbie.
Oh, sorry, Jerry and Barbie. Yeah, that's right. Yeah. So we'll see Jerry and Barbie, and you'll know all about the number 20. Yeah. So anyway, 20 kumbayas for the first pillar.
I'm done. I was like,
no. You only got to the second pillar.
Social democracy.
Yep.
And.
Does that mean socialising while doing democracy?
Yeah.
Like,
you're getting me now because I can't think straight.
But is that like cocktail parties for homeless people? Is that the kind of thing?
Be that.
Okay, wonderful. We love that. What else?
And
animal onesies in the council chamber. Did you ever wear an animal onesie in the council chamber?
I did wear the koala suit once, though.
Were you ever tempted? To wear an animal onesie?
Yeah.
Oh, yeah. What would you have worn?
The koala.
Oh, just a koala.
Yeah, because we had
That's a bit predictable, isn't it?
Koala. What is the name for a koala in Aboriginal language? I can't remember. Would it be yours? Birpi. We had Birpi come to council chambers and present once.
Wow.
Yeah, because we had a development in.
That's like a rights of nature presentation.
Very good. And Birpi came in.
Yeah.
This koala.
Yeah.
You get 4 minutes. I said, Birpi, you're going to go there and you're going to sit there and just be silent.
Yep.
Because you can't talk because you're.
Oh, yeah.
And you're speaking because you got no voice. We got to.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Theatre. The theatre of politics.
Like, if you're not going to talk in your 4 minutes, you can go. It was so.
But that's like well, I love that. Going back to our conversation earlier before the podcast about the world having too many words, getting rid of words. So the silent filibuster, that is a very powerful, that the animal.
Talk for the whole thought, not talk for.
That's outrageous. That is outrageous. Yeah. Yeah, I know. Look, I'm going to write a book with no words, and I'm going to do a talk. Yeah, I'm going to do a talking tour, a world. I'm going to do a world talking tour for my book with no words where I don't even talk. And it's going to be a sellout. It's going to be amazing. But that's the Shadow World podcast.
Yeah.
So
so I left.
Yeah.
And I joined the Greens. As soon as I quit council, I joined the Greens. It was a natural home for me. And a lot of people, a lot of Greens who were in Labor And I think what that taught me is something that I hope lots of people can learn from as well. It is okay to political party.
Yes.
And another one. So
Because
he ran for the Liberals.
did he?
Yeah, and then he joined Labor, and now he's a Green 3 times. It is totally, I give everyone permission to change their...
You can leave a political party because they're all cults, and you can just join another cult. Is that right? Is that about right?
But you do not stay in a party out of loyalty.
Yes.
That is the worst.
Yeah. You should stay there for principle, isn't it?
You drift. You need to drift away too.
Yeah. No, that's good. I mean, you need to reassess
I think
constantly.
People in Labor particularly, I call them Labor loyalists.
Yeah.
Liberal as well, let's face it. And
well, it's just that, yeah. I mean, this is the thing.
Just voted that way, and their mum and dad always have, or they're, they're.
But it's just, yeah.
They don't agree with it. They still vote Labor because
well, exactly, and it's
it's against their interests, totally against their interests and their children's interests. They continue to tick the Labor box.
Yeah.
Just think, people, please just give yourself permission to vote.
Yeah, I mean, to me, it offends the notion of intellectual integrity. Because it goes to the same problems I have with institutionalized religions, where there's just blind faith.
Yeah.
You don't question anything. And if you do question it, I mean, we're seeing the similar thing happening now with the actions of Israel and the Israeli Defense Force, that all of a sudden, if you question it, rather than a rational, logical, reasoned argument, but there's just this hysterical defensiveness about it.
You're not with us.
Yeah, you're against us, you're with. And so the amount of times, if I put a pro-Palestinian post on LinkedIn, which I've been doing a lot of, because there's very little censorship on LinkedIn as opposed to the other tech giant platforms, I'll get accused of being a terrorist sympathizer. I mean, it's just absurd. When I am critical of all breaches of international human rights law, war crimes, atrocity crimes, plausible genocides, and I would condemn any and everyone that's involved with it. So it's
you can choose the truth.
Yeah, but again, it's that. I mean, the thing that really offends for me the notion of intellectual integrity is the dogma, and the dogma I have seen. Part of the reason I quit the Greens is, but I also saw it in the Labor Party, and like you said, I'm sure it's in the Liberal Party, is just this kind of fervent, hysterical, dogmatic, just unthinking, blind obedience, and I just can't handle that. That's not how I'm built. I'm all about critical analysis. That's why I love legal education.
I feel that way about being a member of the Greens. I'm not putting an ad for the Greens now, but the Greens is more of a...
Well, you can, because that's part of your remit.
Well, they're part of a social movement. I like belonging to that. And if the Greens drifted from their values that I actually align with, and not everything, of course, you can't possibly, but generally speaking, majority of the movement I am with, but if they drift in a significant way from those values that I actually hold before their Greens values, deep in my heart, then I'm gone.
Well, so for me, I experienced them firsthand drifting from those values, and I resigned in disgust. Now, but on a broader platform, I appreciate, Adam Bant, Senator David Shoebridge, Senator Larissa Waters, Senator Maureen Faruqi. I appreciate them being...
Senator Lloyd. When?
And Senator Lloyd, of course. Exactly. I'm appreciative, even in the future tense. I appreciate that diversity. And I think what's really interesting, even in Queensland, the Labor Party, in desperation, the Premier Stephen Miles, I mean, these were great policies, social democratic policies about the government owning petrol stations to compete with the big fossil fuels. 50-cent public transport fares, that came from the Queensland Greens. So those ideas feed in, and that's why it's so important.
Yeah.
And this whole craziness that's happening at the moment with you'll know more about this than me, but the funding laws or something that's trying to consolidate the power of the blue pill, red pill nutbags being...
Teal pill to a certain degree.
Teal pill. The teal pill. I'm going to do a business for teal pills.
Kind of working around the edges of these funding.
Yeah.
And, I mean, the Greens' policy position is no dirty donations. They don't take political donations. Like,
yes.
this is the problem with our.
I had a donation. I had a donation turned around from is it Maurice Schwartz, who owns Schwartz Media, because he used to be a property developer. Well, I don't know if he did, but that's what the Queensland Greens said, and they stopped a donation coming to me because of that. So, good on them.
Problem.
Yep.
Like, donations by decisions.
Yes.
And that is so obvious. And we do not understand why we're tinkering around the edges of funding laws here and there, why we don't just end political donations and have publicly funded elections where everyone is on an even keel. You work out how the incumbents, maybe they get less or something, I don't know. But then you're running on community popularity. You're running on your principles. You're running on what you stand for. You're not getting into politics because there's been thousands of dollars spent on one-page ads and billboards and things on TV to get you in, to misinform you about what the other parties are. It's dirty.
Yep.
And I don't understand. It's like such a 101 to me. Get rid of political donations and just publicly fund everyone. $20,000, for example.
20. Oh my God, 20. 20 is the magic number, everyone. I know it was written differently in Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy, but it's 20. It's 2020. It's 2025. 2020.
And they have to run on their own.
Yeah.
They can't be lazy. They can't have an ad do the work for them, or the whole party apparatus do all that work for them. They've got to get out there, shake the hands of the community members, and win every single vote that they get.
I mean, look, I think it's an interesting experiment in the broad context of humanity to have an Olympics where you just allow as much drugs as possible just to see how people are strong. And so, I mean, I think after the debilitating destructiveness of, 40, 50 years of Thatcher, Reaganomics, neoliberalism that's just hollowed out public service, public assets, put all the money in the likes of, just these amazing geniuses like Elon Musk, I think that, they should be able to buy votes. So I think that the billionaire class, I think they need more support, and I think that we should follow them in Australia, don't you think? Because, I mean, Gina Reinhardt, I think she gets a raw deal. She gets these paintings in the gallery. She needs support.
Really does need.
And it's all of these the billionaire class are doing it tough, and they're doing it tough in Australia. I know.
The Labor and Liberal government.
I know.
Everyone's
exactly, and they don't even have like a unanimity across the parliament to care about them.
Teals and the Greens and the Independents.
Oh, and they're always whinging.
What?
I know.
Just
And you know how we talk about the, English people, pommies being whingers, but you can't whinge any more than the frickin' Teals, the Greens, the crossbench, the Independents are the worst. I mean, yeah. And they're always saying, but I'm just representing my constituents. I mean, come on, who does that? It's just
represent the posse.
So it might be a sign of the podcast fatigue because we've been going for a couple of hours and we need to eat something. We've got these beautiful lamp lights around. Nothing's going to run out of batteries. We don't even know if the audio's worked, but the little interface is doing the thing.
It's going to be typing.
Yeah.
Yeah. Subtitles.
Well, we'll throw it through AI.
This can be the first iteration after the No Word book of the.
Oh yeah, this will be the No Word podcast. No, exactly. But look, to finish off, I did want to touch on, because I was responsible as part of my master's dissertation over at the hallowed halls of Oxford University, of writing a paper on why the heck Australia is the only Western liberal democracy without a Bill of Rights, constitutional, or a Human Rights Act. And the likes of former Attorney General George Brown saying, there, don't worry about it. The common law protects everything. Well, of course it doesn't, because the doctrine of parliamentary supremacy means that statute law takes precedence and destroys the common law. And then you have issues like what we've been talking about with national security amendments to the Evidence Act, all of these kinds of things. So I wrote my dissertation was in the context of international human rights law, specifically the Universal Periodic Review. And I think we're up to this. I went to Geneva for the second Universal Periodic Review in November 2015 as a delegate, an NGO delegate representing Australian Lawyers for Human Rights. And that's a whole nother episode, what I witnessed there. But, what I was looking at is, again, with all this criticism from all these international bodies and special measures in the UN since 1983, why do we not have a Human Rights Act? So then I actually met Professor George Williams at a conference at the Australian Human Rights Commission for the 40th anniversary of the Racial Discrimination Act, and I told him I was going to get the campaign up and going again for a federal Human Rights Act. I'd been a volunteer law student at the legal team of the Australian Human Rights Commission at the end of the Frank Brennan inquiry, which made the recommendation for a Human Rights Act to Kevin Rudd, and Robert McClellan was the Attorney General, and sadly that never came to fruition. They passed this human rights framework, which was very watered down, and it has had some benefits in terms of educating parliamentarians and the Parliamentary Joint Committee on Human Rights and all of the reports that are written about statements of compatibility for incoming bills and legislative instruments. But it hasn't really, obviously, there's all of these issues. So George suggested, he was on the panel that brought in the Charter of Human Rights for Victoria and recommended that. And I think he had something to do with the ACT, and he's been a consultant for the federal government many times talking about the need for a federal Human Rights Act, and it seems to be that we're getting close to there. So then we started the campaign for a Queensland Human Rights Act. It was a grueling campaign. It took 4 years. It was just so difficult to convince politicians. I mean, it felt grueling because it just waxed and wanes. And at one point we had 150 organisations on board. And then at another point it was back to the three of us who were there in the beginning, meeting with the Attorney General again, meeting with the Speaker, etc. But we finally got this. And the conversations I had with some ministers was just mind-blowing, the lack of education about the law, even the operation of the law, and they're in the business of making the law, and even not having an understanding about the distinction between the common law and legislation and how that operates. I mean, that was just perplexing. But also just no basic understanding of what it means to have human rights, that it's not a lawyer's picnic, that it is about checking the exercise of the power of the state. And now we have a Queensland Human Rights Act. So this is my very long-winded way of asking the question, why the hell doesn't New South Wales have a Human Rights Act?
Well, I think on a federal level, Senator Shoebridge is maybe introducing federal human rights potentially. But my comment to that would be, of course we need a Human Rights Act. It's obvious, but more importantly, there's no rights in an autocracy, and there's no rights in an autocratic dead planet. And I think when we're talking about the reality of the breach of the separation of powers and the disintegration of our democracy, we gotta be focused on that big picture stuff. And the way we do that, and I think this is perhaps what we don't do so well in the climate change arena, is that we've got all the politicians in Parliament, everyone talking to the scientists and the teachers and the young people and the students and the little groups, and they're all in a little circle talking to each other. The voters are at home watching the footy and home and away. What we need in this country, this is my manifesto, okay, ready? This is what we need in the country. We need civics education back in school. We need
sorry, I'm gonna
democracy really means.
Yes.
What political donations mean.
Yes.
So I went when looking into this because I'm really interested in teaching this around in Australia, and the electoral website has got this pack that you can do if you want to teach students that in school, and it was like clinical. It says nothing boring donations. It's wonderful. It's like a textbook outline of democracy, if democracy was actually what it was. But it's got nothing about influence in politics,
lobbyists, etc.
And what is really going on, and what you vote really means, and what human rights really mean. So if we can get to, I'm not going to say the word, the politicians, get rid of them, put them aside.
Yep.
Let's go to the people.
Yes.
And educate them in civics, educate them on what it means to have a human right, what the human rights are, what you vote, what is really going on with your vote.
Well, and
goes, who is really making the decisions for you, and empower them. That's the only way we can take back democracy.
Yeah, and certainly the agency of the citizen in terms of a civic education. I mean, that's the only thing that has ever changed the world. And you get the famous quotes about, it's nothing but a small group of committed individuals that have, ever kind of changed the world. Or even if you look at statistically, it ends with 20. And statistically, often it's 5% of the population that foment a revolution and everyone else just follows kind of thing.
Change. I mean,
no, things do change.
Violent protests.
Yeah.
This is how you change anything. I don't know if you've got to adapt to what we're living in and where we are and where power is sitting, because what works then is not necessarily going to work now, but education, information will always work.
Yes.
But information.
And but it's also, I think it's different in terms of what, different issues, different geographical areas, different geographical contexts. But what I was going to say is that the agency of the citizen, like people feel so switched off, tuned out, disempowered. You look in the States, you look in places that don't have mandatory, and that don't have mandatory voting laws. But then you look at examples where people take action because they're just mad as hell. They're not going to take it anymore, from the movie Network and Sean McAuliffe, etc. And they get out on the street, and that often can terrify, the politicians into taking action. So the elite, billionaire class wants people to feel disempowered, disenfranchised, probably feel like crap, and just want to buy more useless stuff from Jeff Bezos or whatever it might be. But in fact, that education that is so empowering, and the empowerment that can be very healthy, hopeful, probably keep people out of prison if you look at it in a broader way, can make people have more meaningful lives, and also make people feel hopeful that they do live in a democracy, because when they talk to their representatives, it actually foments positive change. And that because the representative is beholden to them as a constituent and not beholden to some secret lobbyist or whatever it might be.
Seeing the rise of it.
Yes.
And on a hopeful note, I think that's why we see so many people.
The younger people or the older people even. Yeah.
Getting involved in standing on their feet.
Yes.
But in response to that, we see the state crushed with these laws that stop them from doing everything.
Well, can you just talk about...
Going to end.
Can you talk...
It's because the fossil fuels are paying them to keep fossil fuels going, to end our work.
Yeah, we will end on a hopeful note. That's not the end of our world. But can you just talk about Violet Coco ending up in prison, and then the whole reaction? I mean, there's just this hysterical reaction from the mainstream media. It's just so hysterical. And it's, she held a flare on a bridge, and yes, some people were late for something. There was an allegation there was an ambulance, but that turned out to be false. Is that right? And then the government's like, oh, we've got to look at laws to crack down on protesters. And it's just like, well, Los Angeles downtown is on fire today. People are dead. Properties are gone.
Seeing their home.
There was, oh my God, it's climate change. It's an emergency. Yeah. And there was no water coming out of the fire hydrants. Now, it's just it's just mind blowing. And it's analogous with the peaceful protesters to stop the genocide in Gaza, or to stop Australia sending weapons or military aid. And then the mainstream media gets hysterical about these protesters, but rather than talking about what they're protesting about, which is the bigger crime, which is the bigger issue. And it's the same with climate change, isn't it? It just turns the failure of the fourth estate.
Exactly.
Yes.
They have got so much power.
Yes.
They are controlling the narrative.
Yes.
Choose to put something on TV that a politician says, or don't.
Yep.
What really annoys me about the climate change debate is that we've got to have balance.
Yes.
This balance.
The two-sidism.
Climate protests, and then we've got
two-sidism. Yes.
Sided.
Yep.
You're going to be just telling us that,
Mm.
the objectives,
Yes.
the scientific facts. You're not meant to be, that's not balance. That is not balance.
Yep.
And that is creeping into everything. And that is what's going to end the world, I think, because the media have failed us. They have failed their ethical duty to report in the public interest. And now we're seeing this thing like words like climate emergency that mean nothing anymore.
Yep.
It's been so overused. Resilience and climate breakdown and climate change.
But when Hollywood stars' houses start burning down, then there's going to be action,
No, or when your own house, which has happened to me.
Yeah, and I was evacuated in the 2011 floods, and there is nothing that can compare with being so vulnerable, so helpless. You can't do anything because this huge amount of water is coming for you.
It's down as well.
Yeah, and yeah.
So we had no petrol in Lisbon. We couldn't go to.
Oh, yeah.
Well, really, it wasn't that.
Yeah. But it's like a war zone comparatively. Yeah.
Living in an apocalypse.
Yeah.
Anyone who went through that flood in Lisbon,
Yes.
it was like, I thought at one point that the rain was never going to stop.
Yeah.
Like that sideways.
Yes.
And it was going for
and it drives you mad. Yeah. Well, that happened in Brisbane.
That's it. We've tipped to the other side.
Yeah.
There is
Before the 2011 floods, it rained for 6 weeks nonstop. And it was actually the day the rain went away and the blue sky came out that the water rose, and the house next door to us actually went fully underwater. I had to brake. I got permission, I think, from a police officer to break into a car so we could move a car up the hill. So because the water, it was almost entrancing because it was a beautiful day all of a sudden, and the water was so slow, but it just took everything, And I was out there at 5 a.m. with the neighbour, like lifting 3 pianos out of underneath his house. And we had a removal truck coming because I was going down to work for Justice Bromberg on the federal court in Melbourne. And then that got delayed because we got evacuated. We had to move all our stuff out of the house and around the corner. But it was like, because the army came and they were very helpful, but they had roadblocks. So there were military checkpoints to get in because they obviously didn't want everyone just coming in. There was mud everywhere. It was apocalyptic. There was piles of white goods in the parks. It was just indescribable,
That's another thing that's happening as well, is like the militarization of
response.
Yeah. The refusal to empower community.
Yeah.
Refusal to fund that kind of thing. But that's always what's up happening. The community have to do it, but they just want to. They just want to.
Well, they had
with the military.
But they had in Brisbane though, they did have the Mud Army, and they were very effective, and that was community workers, SES, etc. Yeah.
Community that got us out of the.
Yeah. Yeah.
Violet Coco.
Yeah.
She's seen the fires.
Yeah.
She'd seen the fires.
Which fire?
The bushfires in 2019, 2020.
Yeah.
Anyone that has been and
that's the ScoMo Hawaii fires, if anyone does.
If anyone's lived through that experience, they understand.
Terrifying.
An emergency. Now, Violet Coco is one of the most brightest, articulate men you will ever meet.
Yes.
She is so well researched, not only lived experience, but her own research on the catastrophe that is happening right now. And she was desperate to let the world know.
Yep.
She got on the bridge with an emergency flare.
Yes.
And people were disinterested. They were just annoyed about not getting to work.
Yeah.
And it sounds like it's going to have to be until their house gets burnt or a flood happens for them to wake up.
Or getting to Harvey Norman to buy another something like that.
Had every inch of her is motivated to make the world a better place. She is the most positive person. She's one of those clients that has turned into a close friend.
Yep.
She's caring, compassionate. Yep. She's really doing the hard yards on the front line for all of us. She deserves a lot of credit.
Yep.
And she's done the hard yards in jail because she got 15 months.
15 months?
15 months for
the flare.
Bridge with the flare. I represented her after she got sentenced and got her out on appeal bail. And then on the appeal, she got a good behaviour bond, a condition.
Oh, wow. So what was the...
50 million step.
But why was it 15 months? What was the charge, and what was the maximum penalty for the charge?
Charges.
Yes.
The flare charge. I can't remember what it was called. It was... And then she had a resist opposite charge, which she wasn't guilty of because she did nothing to resist. She just stood there.
Yeah.
That's not resist. You've got to physically, kind of force something to be resisting. So she pleaded guilty to that on legal advice, and on the flare, which wasn't a flare under the regulations. So she pleaded guilty to that on legal advice. And they were the new laws that had come in that the Premier had brought in. And I remember Premier Perrottet, when she got sentenced to 15 months jail, he came out, like everyone was talking. Mintz was talking, he was talking. He said, that's good, and I think the book should be thrown at her.
Yep.
And then when we got Violet out, we did a press conference, and she said, and I'm glad Premier Perrottet said that because I love books.
That's funny. Well, that reminds me of, in terms of, citizens, conscientious citizens being motivated to take extraordinary actions, I guess you'd say. I represented a wonderful man who had done a PhD at QUT in music composition. And so he wrote to the minister, the Queensland minister. This was at the time when the International Committee was looking at the issues with the Great Barrier Reef being a World Heritage Area. There was some question about whether it was going to be delisted.
So what?
Well, sorry.
It was on the list to lose its World Heritage.
That's exactly right. And they go through a kind of, there's a proposal that it might lose it, and then there's meant to be a review. So he grew up on sailing boats up and down the coast on all these coral atolls and stuff. His father was an amazing sailor. I think he's from England and had sailed around the world, and he has polio, and he's an extraordinary man. I've met him. And so Renee was particularly concerned. So he wrote to the state minister, got some
bullshit answer,
that kind of response, wrote to the federal minister,
got the same bullshit answer,
and just went, this is crazy. So he went with there was footage of all of this, but he went to Parliament House because of the symbol of democracy. He climbed up on the roof just on the shoulders of his friend. He had a book on Queensland fish. He had a bottle of fish oil. He actually had fish carcasses, and he stuck the heads on or other people there stuck them on the fence, the pickets of Parliament House. So there were all these fish carcasses. It was a very fishy protest, and the Courier Mail made some great headlines like that. I'm sure the Daily Telegraph would have done better. And he stood up there, live streaming because the media probably blacklisted, weren't interested. And he was saying, this fish here is blah, 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 because he knows all about his aquatic marine species. This fish is all about this. And this fish, by the time the Olympics on, it's not going to exist. Rip it out, throw it down, blah, blah, blah. So then the police came. They tried to talk to him. He was too engaged with talking about his fish. And then they got a cherry picker and they lifted him down. He didn't resist or anything, and then he got charged. And he just pleaded. And I don't, like I said, I don't do a lot of criminal law, but I do some pro bono work around sentencing for climate protesters and the like sometimes. And what was really interesting, and certainly the reception we had, because he got a fair but lenient sentence and some community service. But, all of the references he had, he was an academic who's a doctor of music. But he was just moved to extraordinary action, for whatever reason that he thought that might make a difference, or just out of abject frustration that the system wasn't listening to people. So perhaps we'll see more of that. And as you said, at Newcastle, a lot of older people.
Yeah, on the heritage listing of the Great Barrier Reef being removed, he was never going to make a difference, because what ended up happening, of course, it wasn't removed when it should have. Because what people don't understand is when you've got these bodies, the World Heritage Committee, the members are countries, and they vote. And Australia did a deal with Spain. Spain, they lobbied all of the countries. They got it down to one. Spain was the swing vote, and they lobbied Spain that Spain would not vote to remove the list if Australia voted to make something World Heritage listed in their country. That's what's going on. It's dirty.
It
is COP 29. It is there. That's what's going.
It's horse trading. It's horse trading.
It's a vote. It's like political. It's not. It doesn't come down to whether
it's cynical.
disgusting.
Yeah, it's cynical.
Voting.
Yeah.
Doing dirty deals.
Yeah.
No one, The Guardian reported on that, but nobody else did. No mainstream media reported on that.
Yeah, no, absolutely.
Great Barrier Reef is just...
Yeah, I know. It's crazy. And I think...
$1,000 in funding or something.
Well, that's right. And I think the 2019, 2020
2020.
bushfires,
Yeah.
2020, I mean, that was just such a terrifying manifestation of the new era of natural disasters in anthropogenic climate change and the prospect of catastrophic, irreversible climate change. And now we're seeing Los Angeles in the last 24 hours. I mean, it's really scary. And it's bizarre that at the same time we have a president-elect who's just a climate denier. You know, I mean, he's so transactional. He's going to make all the deals with all the, big businessmen and whatever that is. But if we can just finish on a positive note, I just wanted to know what, from all of your experience, from your passions, from your interests, politics, the law, and certainly for younger people who might feel overwhelmed and or disillusioned with the system, the baby boomers, they might say, have just kind of destroyed the planet, they've destroyed politics, but at some point in the next 20 years, they're going to be on their way out and the next generation will be stepping up to take leadership. I mean, we're almost kind of getting over that hump and the younger people will be coming in. Well, yeah. The younger people will be blaming us for not keeping our parents in check with the boomers, etc. But because I have people contact me on LinkedIn all the time, who want to work with me, not understanding that I'm a barrister and not a law firm, or because they see the interesting work that I do, or they want to know what it's like to do practice in the law that I'm doing. I used to go and talk to a lot of law students about the law, and I'd never sugarcoat it. I'd say that it's a grueling profession. I mean, if you have a choice to do anything else, maybe do that, unless you have a real passion for it. Because a lot of people would just study law because they got good grades at school and they weren't allowed to have a gap year and experience the world. I always joked that I had 8 gap years, but I, did a lot of study in that time as well. But what would you say to people who want to make a difference in the world? They realize that we're in a kind of chaotic, catastrophic time.
Mm.
We're kind of more interconnected than ever before, or there's a growing greater realization that we're more interconnected than ever before. And there's all of this kind of really just concentrations of exposés, whether it be of, colonization and the kind of embedded genocidal tendencies, or of the double standards when it comes to international law, or of the cynicism when it comes to international institutions, and just the disillusionment from all of that. But where can people get hope? And what do you think is a good way to kind of focus your energy in terms of trying to make a positive difference in the world?
Well, I think if you're not feeling in a bit of despair and about the world, then you're asleep. So tick if you are, because that's the first step, is having awareness of it and some insight about it.
Someone asked me about this the other day, again, I think on LinkedIn, about them feeling heartbroken and gaslit and crazy about what's happening in Palestine. And I said, I said a similar sentiment, but I also said, and I don't know who quoted this, but feeling sane in an insane world is a sure sign of insanity. So feeling like everything's freaking nuts because everything is nuts.
Yeah.
That's actually
terrible because it's just.
But that's actually a sane response to feel that, you know what I mean? So, yeah.
It gets to me when political parties demonize anyone that independent grantee that come forward with scientific evidence.
Yes.
Say, and it's like they pretend like it's not the science,
yes.
That it's just a political position,
Well, let's talk about adult time for adult crime in Queensland. It's another episode. That's another episode. But I mean, how can we be, as ostensibly or allegedly intelligent species on planet Earth at 2025, not following, post the Enlightenment, post all of the developments in sophisticated technologies and science and all this stuff we boast to ourselves about and pat ourselves on the back about, how can we not be listening to experts? It just blows my mind with climate change, with, allowing, corporate vested interests to always trump everything else. It's just insane. It's so stupid. Like there's something about humanity. There's something about human brains that is just got this just fatal flaw of just imbecilic stupidity.
Yeah, well, look, I think speaking truth to power, I think you just have to keep doing it. And you have to get on the fifth estate, which is Twitter even. You can't...
The podcast?
Yeah.
Well, there's a rise of podcasts, isn't there? Yeah.
Instagram, whatever forum you're on, LinkedIn, whatever, you've got to continually call people out and not be rude. But
shitpost Elon Musk as much as you can. It's good. Do that 20 times a day before breakfast.
It's only frightening to speak truth to power, I think, if you're the only one doing it.
Yeah.
If everyone's doing it, then that one person, you're not going to be crushed so badly.
Sure.
Okay, so if everyone is just brave and speaks truth to power in their home, at the school, at their uni, in their workplace,
so everywhere and anywhere, you can do it. It means something. It's meaningful. Yeah. It makes a difference.
And don't despair. Bob Brown says, don't despair.
Yep.
Take action.
Yes.
Do not just sit there and freaking hope.
Yep.
Hope is a verb. Hope is like just you're hoping something will happen.
Yes.
Hope takes action.
Yep.
So whatever you do, you don't get to hope. That's a privilege. You don't get to hope if you're just sitting at home hoping that things will be better or different. You have to actually take action, and then you deserve to have hope. Then you got that privilege. Then you can have hope because you are doing something. It only takes one person. I really believe in the ripple effect.
Yes.
One person to create a revolution, and you can do that every single day.
Yep.
Yeah.
Wonderful. That's a very positive note. And I do have to say that amazing singer from the 60s, a famous quote about, don't despair, take action, if I'm paraphrasing. But that when I was feeling just so deeply and profoundly violated by what happened since October the 7th, being a believer in international law, being a believer in the international rules-based order, being a believer in the rule of law, and then just seeing it disgraced and destroyed and reduced to rubble and ongoing, I've always been an activist, an advocate, an active person. So I went to the Speaker's Corner in Parliament in Queensland, and I set up my chambers, and I called it Ceasefire Chambers, put out a media release with my former client who's a media consultant. Shout outs to Neil Dooley from Doorstop Media, absolute legend. Use his services. He's brilliant. And we put out a media release and mostly, of course, the media was disinterested. But the purpose of that was actually to show solidarity as a privileged white male Australian with all of my colleagues who, might be Palestinian, who might be Muslim, who might be, from other different parts of the world, just to say that, I care about this. And, I was telling you I had an experience when I was in high school where, as much as I hated my high school, one of the religious education teachers used to bring in these interesting guest speakers, and he brought in these 3 nuns one time who came from Rwanda during the genocide. And I was so moved that I went down at the end after all the other students had left, and I said, I want to go to Rwanda and help you guys out. And they just kind of laughed and patted me on the head. But I feel like all of a sudden another plausible genocide, in the words of the International Court of Justice, or a genocide, if you look at all the evidence, Amnesty International, Human Rights Watch, you name it, happening, well, now is the time not to be looking the other way, on the turning away, Pink Floyd, not to be
cognitive dissonance about it.
Not to be cognitive dissonance, not to just
do anything.
Yeah, not to just do your job, but actually to take a stand.
Yeah.
And as much as it might make people feel uncomfortable, they're not as uncomfortable as the children who were being massacred.
They came for the socialist.
Yeah. Well, I did a reimagining of that. that went viral because it was first they came for the socialists, so I did not speak up because I was not a socialist, or the trade unionists, so I did not speak up. Then they came for the Jews, I did not speak up because I wasn't a Jew. Then they came for the Palestinians, I did not speak up because I was not a Palestinian. Then they came for freedom of speech, and I didn't speak up because I didn't care. Then they came, and then they came for me, and there was no one left to speak for me, kind of thing. And doesn't that ring through through the ages? Thank you again, Eddie Lloyd.
That's okay.
Extraordinaire warrior.
No, don't get stuck in the mud with the overwhelmingness of the world. Get out in nature and restore your soul while you have that privilege. Don't think punish yourself because some people don't have it and you do. Get out there and put some balance in your life by feeling blue, touching green, and getting some nature.
Oh, look at that. Oh my God, you know who's going to steal that?
Who?
Well, Clive Palmer's trying to trademark teal, but feeling blue, touching green. No, feeling blue, touching green, that's a teal because you've mixed green and
together.
Oh, feeling blue, touching green. So the wonderful
liberals vote green.
Yeah,
that's the
who are our So I was in a cafe the other day in Brisbane, and I was talking about coffee to the cafe owner, as you do, and her name, and we were in the conversation. I said, "Oh, what's your name?" Oh, sorry. And they had this was a very touching for other cafe owners out there. This was beautiful. They had on the menu, this is in Sherwood in Brisbane, but they had on the menu a iced coffee that was the name of a gentleman, and all the donations were to Beyond Blue. And so I ordered one, and I was asking about it because obviously he'd sadly committed suicide. And the owner said, "Oh, that was the previous owners, and he was one of the employees, and he was well known around the area. It's very sad. He was a young man." And but we've kept the tradition going after I bought the cafe, and I just thought, well, that's absolutely awesome. Still get goosebumps. And so I bought one, delicious, by the way. And then I was talking to her and I said, "Oh, what's your name?" And she said, "Zali." And I was like, "Oh, wow, that's a really interesting name. I'm Benedict. I know about interesting names." And I know one Zali. There was a young girl in my eldest daughter's dance class in Mullaney who was a Zali. And then I said, "And Zali Stegel." So she told me, this is crazy. She said to me, "I'm named after Zali Stegel."
Already?
Because and she owns a cafe.
Okay.
Because her mother, so her uncle, her mum's brother, was a ski instructor down at Kosciuszko, and her mum used to go down there to go skiing because he was a ski instructor. So she was going down the Black Diamond run that was named after Zali Stegel on the day that she got to the end of it and felt a bit sick and found out she was pregnant. So she called her Zali. Shout outs to Zali at the, can't remember the name of the cafe, but they do the amazing iced coffee caffeinated beverage in honour of the young man, and they make the donations to Beyond Blue, which is very lovely. Every small act makes a difference, and that's what we've been talking about today. Thank you for tuning in. Like I said, there is an ongoing segment about unsolicited podcast feedback, which I will exercise my right to take no notice of, and we don't even know if this video angle worked out. But it was because Eddie protested about us looking like
two separate rooms, like a
podcast chumps. Yeah. So I was going to send her to her bedroom, and then I was going to be here, but instead we did it like this. And
it's better.
Who even knows if it'll work? But for all of the QAnon conspiracy theorists out there, there's the craziest Q drop you've ever seen. Do we say that everyone's been red pilled by looking at that? So your eyes have been opened. Somewhere deep in your subconscious, you know the answers to everything because it's on the board behind us.
It's got to stitch it all together.
Yeah. The magic number's 20. Don't forget that. And Jerry and Barbie will be joining you. Yeah. Jerry and Barbie from Byron Bay. They're very enlightened individuals. They will be joining you at some point, probably with their active wear on, probably drinking some kind of enlightened chakra vibrating beverage.
Vibrating water.
It'll be a vibrating water, and they'll just be exuding energy and talking about their journey. So look forward to that. There's so many journeys that we could go on with Jerry and Barbie. So yeah, please, thank you for tuning in.
Yeah.
Love you all. We've gone for a long time, but there's a lot to discuss. I need to work out how to put, like, she needs to eat. We've been eating a lot of fish. I was being a hunter gatherer and digging up pippies from the beach, and cook them up, and very primal. It was great. I love it. So yeah, get out in nature, get your hands dirty, plant some trees, have some fun, and we will talk to you on the next episode. Signing off. Bye.